The first cold breath at the doorway tells you that in the 1910s in Innsbruck, the snow gauge man's morning is yours, and the white work waits quietly beyond the sill. Settle in now. The pace is slow and plain. We'll take the round together, step by careful step, while the town still lies under blue winter shadow. Your boots find the packed snow outside the station yard, and the leather gives a low creak as you shift your weight. In the 1910s Innsbruck morning, the inn moves unseen beneath its bridges, muffled by frost and by the sleeping houses along the river. You carry a notebook, a pencil, and a small rule polished smooth by your thumb, while your breath gathers and disappears before your face. The snow gauge itself is not grand, only a marked post, a metal cylinder, a level patch kept clear of drifting where possible, and yet your small reading belongs to a wider map of weather. Few people will ever picture you here, because the work is quiet enough to vanish. The city does not wake all at once, sense slowly, first with a shutter drawn back, then with a cartwheel pressing a dark line into the snow, then with the faint iron sound of a tram far down the street. You know these sounds because you hear them every morning, and we can let them keep time for us. Innsbruck sits close beneath the mountains, and the mountains are always present, even when cloud hides them, like a cold hand resting above the roofs. Your first task is to cross the yard without disturbing the measuring place. That sounds simple, and it is simple, but simple things have their own care. You step where yesterday's footprints have hardened, keeping away from the smooth square that must tell the truth of the night. Snow lies differently on each surface, loose on the boards, crusted near the wall, feathered along the fence, and your eyes begin separating those small differences before your mind names them as weather. The gauge stands near enough to be visited before breakfast, but far enough from warm walls and roof edges to avoid the easy mistakes of shelter. You brush a little frost from your sleeve and bend close, not hurried, not theatrical, just close enough to see where the fresh white surface meets the black mark. The pencil is cold through your glove, so you hold it a moment between your fingers, and the wood smells faintly of cedar when you bring it near your face. A snow gauge man in Innsbruck is not famous like a mountaineer or visible like a station master. Your work leaves marks on paper, not statues in squares, yet the habit of it has weight, because every morning's number joins other numbers from valleys, passes, farms, railway sheds, observatories, and lonely posts where someone else is also bending toward a ruler in the dim light. We are not chasing greatness here, only the steady truth of how much snow came down while the town slept. You lower the rule gently until it touches the old base beneath the new layer. There is a soft resistance, a grainy pause, then the point settles. You read the depth, not as a guess, but as a patient agreement between eye, hand, and mark. Some mornings the surface is dry and powdery, and the rule slips through it like flour. Some mornings it has a crust thin as sugar glass, and you feel it crack with a tiny sound only you would notice in the cold. The notebook opens stiffly. Its corners have darkened from damp gloves, and a few pages carry pale smudges where snow has touched the ink and dried. You write the date in the old way, slowly enough that the pencil does not tear the paper. The hour matters too, because measurements taken at steady times can speak to one another across distance. You do not need to think grandly about that. You only need to write the figure, close the book, and keep the round. By now, the first lamps in windows have begun to pale against the morning. A woman shakes a cloth inside an upstairs room, and the movement sends no sound down to you. Somewhere, a door opens, and warm air briefly carries the smell of coal smoke, bread crust, and damp wool into the street. You stand with your small instruments and your quiet duty, feeling the weather not as a story, but as something resting on your cap, your shoulders, your eyelashes, and your hands. This is part of why few know you. The work begins before attention has gathered. It happens beside sheds, behind offices, near schoolyards, at railway edges, and on level patches where snow is allowed to lie undisturbed. No crowd forms to watch a man read a post. No child runs home to describe the careful way you squat beside a metal cylinder. Still, when we stay beside you long enough, the little scene becomes full of life. The metal precipitation gauge waits nearby, rimmed with frost. It has caught what fell from the sky, though snow is more troublesome than rain, because it heaps, bridges, blows, melts and clings. You lift the outer can with both hands, careful not to spill the loose crystals along the lip. The metal is so cold it seems to have its own silence. If melting is needed, it will be done gently, because the depth of snow and the water inside it are not the same measure. That difference matters in a quiet, practical way. A deep fall of dry alpine powder may contain less water than a smaller fall of wet, heavy snow from a warmer cloud. The railway clerk, the road crew, the farmer, the river watcher, and the men thinking about spring, melt all need to understand that difference. You may never meet them. They may never know your name, but your careful note helps them read the mountain's stored water. You turn back once to the gauge plot before leaving it. The snow there is marked only by the narrow hole your rule made, and even that looks modest, almost private. The town around you is becoming less blue and more grey, with the first tram wires showing against the sky. We can pause there for a breath, because the morning has accepted your first reading, and nothing in the day needs to be pulled faster than it wants to move. From the yard, your path bends toward another measuring place, closer to an open field where the wind behaves differently. Innsbruck is a city of edges, with streets pressed between river, rail, slope, and mountain, and you learn that snow has a different temper at each edge. Near a wall it piles softly, near a corner it scours away, under trees it sifts down late in little sighs. Your work is partly numbers, but partly learning where the numbers can be trusted with care. The second gauge stands beyond a low fence. You open the gate by lifting the iron latch with 2 gloved fingers, and it gives a dull scrape that sounds louder than it is. There is a smell of frozen wood here, and of stable straw somewhere nearby, and of smoke lying low, because the air is heavy. You are still early enough that the surface holds its night shape, before feet, sun, thaw, or falling roof snow confuse the record. You kneel, though the cold comes straight through the cloth at your knee. That is part of the job, and after years of winters, your body knows it without complaint. You sight along the marks, check the level, and compare the depth with the first reading. They will not match exactly. They are not meant to be identical. Snow is local, and in Innsbruck, beneath the high shoulders of the Nordkette and the open valley of the Inn, local can mean only a few streets apart. The mountains shape the weather in ways a quiet worker comes to feel before explaining. Moist air can be lifted, cooled, emptied, and sent down again changed. Wind may bring flakes in from one direction and sweep them from another, leaving a clean patch beside a deep drift. You do not need the language of a lecture to know this. You know it because your cheeks feel the wind, your boots find the drifts, and your morning figures rise and fall with the slopes. A dog barks once behind a gate, then thinks better of it. The sound is padded by snow, and the silence after it seems even softer. You write the second reading, add a small note about drifting, and tap the pencil against the page to clear a grain of ice from the tip. These little notes are as useful as numbers, because a number without its weather can sometimes pretend to be more certain than it really is. Few know the snow gauge man, because the office record often keeps only the measurement, not the person who took it. A ledger may preserve the depth, the date, the station, and the water equivalent, while your cold fingers, your early steps, your habit of looking twice, and your quiet judgment fade away behind clean columns. We can bring you back by staying with the work itself. The work remembers your presence. In the 1910s, the city still belongs to the old empire for part of the decade, and later to a changed country with changed borders. but the snow keeps arriving without asking which seal is on the paper. Your forms may alter, the office stamp may differ, names on buildings may shift, yet the gauge still needs a level eye, and the morning still needs someone willing to stand in the cold before the day has found its voice. You tuck the notebook inside your coat to keep it dry. The pencil goes into an inner pocket where it rests against the slight warmth of your chest. Then you lift the small collecting can and carry it toward the workroom, holding it steady as if it were soup in a shallow bowl. The path back is already rougher than when you came. A cart has passed. A child's boot marks cross the street. The world is beginning to disturb the surface. Inside the workroom, the air feels almost thick after the morning cold. It smells of coal ash, damp wool, paper, metal, and the faint sharpness of ink. Your ears notice the change first, because outside sounds are softened by the walls, and the little sounds of instruments come forward. A chair leg drags. A stove shifts with a small tick. Somewhere in the building, a door closes with the careful firmness of someone trying not to wake the hour. You place the snow sample where it can melt slowly. Too much heat would be clumsy. The point is not to hurry winter into water, but to let the measure become readable. A glass cylinder waits on the table, clean and narrow, marked with lines that catch the weak window light. You remove your gloves and flex your fingers. They are red, a little stiff, and they return to themselves with a prickling warmth that feels almost like needles. The room's window looks toward roofs carrying uneven caps of snow. Some caps hang over the eaves in rounded lips, and now and then a pinch breaks loose and drops with a soft thud below. You do not count that snow. Roof snow is its own small country, warmed from beneath and shaped by tiles. Your concern is the open fall, the patient fall, the snow that arrives from the sky and settles where the gauge can receive it without argument. As the sample melts, you prepare the ledger. The book is large enough to command both hands, and its spine has softened from years of being opened at winter mornings. Lines ruled in ink wait for place, time, depth, remarks, and water content. You may not think of yourself as a writer, yet much of your work becomes writing, because weather must be translated before it can travel beyond the yard. The pencil's dry whisper is part of the process. There is comfort in this translation. White depth becomes a mark. Melted snow becomes a volume. A morning becomes a row. The row joins other rows, and together they make something larger than any one person standing cold in the yard. We can feel that without making it grand. Sometimes useful work is only the making of small faithful marks, repeated until they become a record strong enough for someone else to lean on. The water in the cylinder rises less than a stranger might expect. That is one of winter's quiet lessons. Snow looks abundant, lavish, almost endless when it covers roofs and streets. Yet when it melts, it gathers into a smaller, clearer truth. You bend to read the meniscus, the curved surface at the glass, and you bring your eye level with the mark, so the number does not shift. Even here, indoors, the work asks for patience. You enter the value beside the depth. Then you add the remark about wind at the second gauge, writing small but legible words, because someone later may need to understand why one station differed from another. Perhaps that someone will be you next week. Perhaps it will be a clerk in another town. Perhaps, many years later, it will be someone turning pages in an archive, looking for traces of a winter that has long since melted from every street. The stove gives another soft tick. Your coat hangs from a peg, darkened at the hem where snow has brushed it. A little puddle forms beneath your boots, and you move them aside so the water does not reach the leg of the table. These are ordinary things, but they are the ordinary things that hold the day together. The job has no trumpet call. It has wet leather, cold fingers, clean glass, ruled paper, and a steady hand. By mid-morning, the light has strengthened enough to show the whole room plainly, and the work changes from gathering to checking. You compare the morning's figures with yesterday's, and your eyes travel down the old rows with practiced slowness. There was a thaw 3 days ago, then a light fall, then a colder night that sealed the surface. The numbers show it, but so does your memory of boot sounds, shovel edges, and the way breath hung in the air. This is another reason your role stays hidden. Weather records can look as if they arrived by themselves. A neat table gives no hint of the man who walked through snow before breakfast, or of the care taken to avoid a drift, or of the judgment used when wind had played tricks with the gauge. We know better now, because we have walked with you. We have felt the cold rim of the can and the pencil warming in your pocket. A clerk may come in later and copy the values for transmission. If the office has telegraph access, the report may travel quickly, turned into signals, and sent along wires that hum through winter air. If not, it may move by post or by hand, folded into the slower habits of administration. Either way, your numbers leave Innsbruck without your footprints. They travel as figures, light and exact, while you remain with the gauge, the workroom, and the next fall. You take a piece of bread from your bag. It is dense, dark, and a little dry at the edge, but it softens as you chew. There may be cheese wrapped in paper, or a small apple kept in a pocket until the cold has made it crisp. You eat without ceremony, standing near the stove, listening to the buildings settle around you. Outside, iron tires pass over packed snow with a muted crunch that seems to belong to the season. The food matters because the body doing careful work is still a body. It needs warmth. It needs salt. It needs a moment when the hands are not measuring, lifting, writing, or brushing snow from a rim. You look down at your fingers while you eat, at the small cracks near the knuckles, at the pale half-moons of the nails, at the places where cold has made the skin shine. These are the instruments behind the instruments, and they are yours. When the bread is finished, you wipe your fingers on a cloth and return to the bench. The ledger must be blotted, the sample can rinsed, and the gauge pieces set ready for another day. A careless residue of water could freeze where it should not, or leave a false trace in the next measure. So you dry the metal, turn it toward the light, and check the lip with a thumb. The surface is smooth, cold, and clean. There is no romance in rinsing a can, and that is exactly why it belongs here. Sleepy work often lives in maintenance, in the wiping, setting back, checking twice, and leaving tools where morning hands can find them. You know that tomorrow's piece depends on today's order. The next cold dawn will be easier if the rule is dry. The notebook is ready, the pencil is sharpened, and the path to the gauge remains remembered by your feet. Outside the window, Innsbruck has become itself again. People cross the street with collars raised. Smoke rises straighter now, or bends, depending on the small changes in the air. A tram passes with a sound like metal thinking quietly. Beyond the roofs, if the cloud lifts, the mountain faces show themselves in pale winter light, not as scenery for postcards, but as the high cold walls that shape your working day. You may be asked why a snow reading is needed when anyone can see it has snowed. The answer is gentle and practical. Seeing snow is not the same as knowing how much fell, how wet it was, where it gathered, how fast it changed, or what it may become when warmth returns. The eye loves whiteness, but the road crew, the railway, the farmer, and the river watcher need measures. Your work gives shape to what the eye only feels. Still, you are not a machine for numbers. You notice the small things that a table cannot hold. You notice when the flakes are large enough to land with visible shadows. You notice when snow squeaks underfoot, a sign of real cold. You notice when thaw darkens the lower walls, when icicles lengthen, when the air smells briefly of wet stone instead of frost. These observations settle inside you like another kind of ledger. As the morning wears on, we move from the first readings into the quieter labor of keeping the station trustworthy. The gauge plot must be guarded from accident, not with drama, but with ordinary watchfulness. A delivery boy may take a shortcut. A dog may nose at the fence. A shovel may throw street snow too near the measured ground. You step outside again, not to command the world, only to guide it gently around this small square of truth. You brush the fence rail where snow has built into a rounded line. The wood beneath is dark and wet, and the bristles make a dry scraping sound against the grain. A sign may hang there, plain enough for local eyes, asking that the ground be left undisturbed. It will not stop everything. Signs never do, but it reminds those who pass that this little patch is doing work too, even while it appears to be merely empty. A neighbor nods as she passes with a basket. She may know you as the weatherman, or the snowman, or simply the quiet fellow who is always out early in winter. Her breath lifts in a small cloud, and the basket cloth is dusted white along one edge. You nod back. No speech is necessary, though sometimes a word about the cold passes between you, one of those common phrases that means more in the mouth than it does on paper. People remember storms, but they often forget the keepers of small measurements. They remember the year snow blocked a pass. The weak roofs had to be cleared. The day a train arrived late with its buffers packed white. They remember inconvenience, beauty, and trouble. They do not always remember the morning after morning when you read the gauge and made the weather legible. That forgetting is not cruel. It is only how quiet work disappears into its own usefulness. You return to the plot and look for disturbance. The surface still lies clean, except for a light scatter from the fence, where your brushing sent a few grains down. You note where they fell and keep them away from the measuring line. The body learns such caution gradually. At first you may have thought only of depth. Later you learn that snow has edges, histories, and little accidents, and that good measurement begins by noticing what should not be counted. The cold has changed since dawn. It is brighter now, but not necessarily warmer, and the sun, if present, strikes some places while leaving others blue. Your left cheek feels it first, that slight difference where light reaches skin. The snow on the sunny roof begins to loosen, grain by grain, while the shaded yard remains powdery and still. Innsbruck in winter is never one temperature. It is a patchwork of exposures. This patchwork teaches humility. A number is true for its place, and useful because its place is known. You do not pretend that one reading speaks for every lane, field, roof, and slope. You gather what can be gathered honestly. That may be the deepest lesson of the snow gauge man, though you would likely say it more simply, perhaps only that the gauge must stand clear, the time must be kept, and the reading must be taken with care. The station yard keeps teaching you. Even when nothing seems to happen, you stand a moment longer than necessary, letting your eyes move from gauge to fence, from fence to roofline, from roofline to the pale band of cloud over Innsbruck. A person passing quickly would see only snow and morning. You see the places where wind has shaved it thin, where footsteps have compacted it blue, where soot from a chimney has settled in faint grey specks. We stay with these small differences because they are the language of your work. Near the gauge, a narrow boardwalk keeps boots away from the clean measuring ground. Its planks are ridged with frost, and each step gives a quiet wooden complaint beneath your weight. You check that the board has not shifted in the night, because a crooked plank can invite someone to step where they should not. The whole station depends on small boundaries like this. Not grand walls, just enough order to protect a patch of honest snow. Your hand rests briefly on the fence post, and the wood feels rough through the glove. A boy passes beyond the lane, pulling a sled with a tin pail tied to it by cord. The pail bumps once, twice, then slides more smoothly where the track has hardened. You watch him without calling out, because he stays well away from the gauge, and his morning belongs to errands, not measurements. Still, his sled leaves a shining ribbon behind it, and the sight reminds you how many kinds of marks winter accepts. Your marks go into a ledger, his go into the street, bright for a little while, then gone. By late morning, the first work of measurement has settled into the quieter task of tending. You return indoors with snow dusting the cuffs of your trousers, and the warmth of the room rises around you in layers. The stove smells faintly of iron and coal, and the damp cloth near the door gives off the familiar scent of thawing wool. You hang your gloves open so the insides can dry, because wet gloves in winter become a kind of small punishment by afternoon. We can feel the day turning inward, toward maintenance. On the table, the instruments wait in their plain order. There is the rule with dark marks, the collecting can, the glass cylinder, the ledger, the blotter, and the pencil shaved to a clean point. None of it looks remarkable, and that is part of the reason few know the Snow Gauge Man of 1910s Innsbruck. The tools do not glitter. They do not promise speed or spectacle. They do a slower thing. They ask you to be consistent, and consistency, over time, becomes a kind of craft. You run a dry cloth around the lip of the gauge can, feeling for dents too slight for the eye. A damaged rim can catch snow differently, especially in wind, and a small distortion repeated through a season can lead the record away from the truth. The cloth makes a soft rasping sound on the metal. When your thumb finds nothing wrong, you set the can down on its marked place. This is how confidence is built in such work, by touch, by habit, by a steady return to plainness. The ledger draws your eye again. Yesterday's entry sits above today's, and the day before that, and the day before that, the winter descending in rows. There is comfort in rows when the outside world is all drift and curve. You can see the cold spell, the brief thaw, the return of powder, and the morning when wet flakes fell heavily from a low sky. Each line is small, but the sequence has a slow pulse. We can let that pulse carry us, like a quiet clock. Someone in another office may later read only the result. They may see that Innsbruck received so much fresh snow, containing so much water, observed at such an hour. They may not know that your pencil nearly slipped because your fingers were stiff, or that a gust had curled snow against the fence, or that you waited for your breath to clear from the glass before reading the meniscus. The human part remains between the lines, soft and unrecorded. You sharpen the pencil with a small knife. The shaving curls away in a pale ribbon, and the scent of cedar rises, dry and clean against the coal-warmed room. A sharper point makes smaller figures, and smaller figures keep the ledger neat. You brush the shaving into your palm and place it aside rather than letting it fall into a damp patch on the table. Such neatness is not vanity. It is simply the way you make the next task easier for your future self. Outside, the town grows louder without becoming loud. Hooves strike packed snow with a dull clop, softened by the crust beneath them. A bell somewhere counts the hour, and the sound comes through the window as if wrapped in cloth. A woman laughs once in the street, then the sound fades under the scrape of a shovel. Innsbruck is awake now, but winter keeps its edges padded. You listen while checking the figures again, and the room seems to breathe around the ledger. At times, your work includes comparing the snow depth with reports from higher ground. A station in a village above the valley may send a greater depth, while a sheltered place near the river reports less. These differences are not errors by themselves. They are the shape of the land speaking through weather. You learn the names of places not by visiting them often, but by seeing how they behave in snow. How one slope gathers it, another sheds it, and another holds it in shadow. The Nordkette rises north of the city, though from inside the room it is only a presence beyond the wall. You know it is there because every change in wind seems to remember it. Air slides down cold in the evening, curls along the river, then lifts or pauses when the sun reaches the valley. You may not say all this aloud. You may only reach for your coat when your bones tell you the wind has shifted. The body becomes its own quiet barometer. Near midday, the work opens outward again, and you prepare for a second walk through the snow. Not every station takes several readings each day, and not every day requires extra attention. But fresh snow can make a careful person restless in the best way. You want to see whether drifting has increased, whether a thaw has started near the walls, whether the open patch still lies as it should. We go out again slowly, with the door closing softly behind us into the cold. The air outside has changed texture. It is brighter, and the snow reflects light upward, so the undersides of eaves and window ledges glow faintly. Your eyes narrow against it, not from discomfort exactly, but from the abundance of white. The street has been cut by wheels and boots into ridges, grey slush in the busier places, and clean powder at the edges. You choose your steps with old knowledge, avoiding the smooth patches where compressed snow has become almost glass. At the gauge plot, the morning's stillness has been touched by the day. A few specks of soot lie on the surface, likely from a nearby chimney, and a thin spray of snow has blown from the fence rail. You note it, because nothing needs to be hidden from the record. The job does not ask you to make the world look perfect. It asks you to notice what happened. There is a great calm in that, and we can rest a while inside its honesty. You lean close to the stake again, though this time you are not taking the formal morning value. You are checking the station, reading its condition, learning whether the surface has settled. Snow settles even in cold weather, its crystals rearranging under their own weight, the airy spaces slowly closing. What was deep at dawn may be slightly lower by noon, without melting at all. You press the idea gently in your mind, because winter is full of such quiet changes. A small hand broom hangs inside the shed. You take it down and brush the ledge where blown snow might later fall into the gauge. The bristles are stiff from cold, and the handle has been darkened by years of palms. Each stroke leaves the wood bare for a moment before new flakes, if they come, will begin their patient covering. We are not erasing winter. We are making room for the next reading to belong only to the sky, as much as possible, and to nothing else. The phrase "as much as possible" belongs to this work. Snow is never perfectly obedient. Wind leans on it. Heat rises into it. People cross it. Birds mark it with tiny feet. A good observer knows the limits of a gauge, and that knowledge does not weaken the work. It makes the work more trustworthy. You do not promise a number that contains the whole valley. You promise a careful number from a known place, taken in a known way, at a known time. Across the lane, a man clears his steps with a wooden shovel. The shovel edge sounds different from metal, lower and softer, pushing snow rather than cutting it. He lifts, turns, and throws with a rhythm that could almost be counted. Some of the snow breaks into powder in the air, and some lands with a damp slap where the sun has reached it. You watch only long enough to see that none is coming near the gauge, then return to your own quiet round. The snow gauge man's work sits among other winter labors. Shovelers clear thresholds. Stable hands break ice in troughs. Railway workers check points and switches. Housewives shake mats. Shopkeepers sweep stoops, and tram crews watch the rails. Your task is quieter than many, but it belongs to the same morning economy of keeping life legible under snow. We can feel that shared rhythm without turning away from you. All around Innsbruck, hands are moving in service of winter. When you return to the workroom again, your cheeks carry the sting of light as much as cold. The room smells warmer than before, with a little steam rising from the kettle and damp wool now fully thawed near the peg. You pour water into a cup, not hurried, letting your fingers enjoy the heat through the ceramic. The first sip tastes faintly metallic from the kettle, and it warms your mouth before it reaches the rest of you. Even measurement needs comfort. On a shelf, old ledgers keep their own kind of winter. Their covers are rubbed at the corners, and the paper edges have darkened where hands have turned them for years. If you open one from a past season, you can find storms that everyone spoke of then and almost no one mentions now. You can find lean winters, wet winters, early falls, late thaws, and long stretches of nothing much. Weather becomes memory only when someone makes a place for it to stay. You may remember the older men who taught you where to stand and how to read. Perhaps one corrected your eye at the gauge, not sharply, just with a finger against the mark and a quiet instruction to lower your head. Perhaps another showed you how to melt snow without losing any, or how to note drifting without making the note too large. These skills pass through ordinary sentences, over tables, beside doors, in moments no one thinks to preserve, and yet they shape the record. In the 1910s, instruments are already part of a wider scientific world, but here they remain close to the body. The glass must be read by an eye. The can must be lifted by hands. The book must be kept dry by common sense. A thermometer may hang nearby, a barometer may stand in its case, and a rain gauge may wait for warmer months, but winter snow still asks you to come near and look. The work is technical, but never distant. You check the thermometer as part of the room's broader routine. The mercury line sits thin and bright, and you bring your face close enough to see without warming the glass with your breath. Temperature gives context to the snow, especially when the day hovers near thaw. A few degrees can change flakes to sleet, powder to crust, road snow to slush. You write the value in words and figures as the form requires, though here in our telling the numbers can soften into speech. There is a discipline in not over-explaining to the page. A ledger cannot hold every sensation. It cannot hold the smell of wet leather, the pale glare outside, the way the stove ticked after the door opened, or the memory of the boy's sled. It receives what it is meant to receive. The rest remains with you, and now with us, as part of the atmosphere around the measurements. That is how a quiet job becomes fuller than its documents. By early afternoon, the light through the window shifts lower, and the town's working sounds settle into a steadier pattern. The morning errands are done, and the evening ones have not begun. This is a middle hour, useful and unshowy. You use it for copying, sorting, and checking supplies, because a missing pencil on a snowy dawn is a larger trouble than it seems. The drawer opens with a wooden slide, and inside are spare points, tags, twine, folded forms, and a small reserve of order. You count the forms by touch, lifting the corners with a dry finger. Paper has its own winter behavior. It stiffens in the cold, curls near the stove, and drinks moisture if left too close to a wet sleeve. You keep the best sheets wrapped, and the used ones stacked flat beneath a weight. The weight may be a smooth stone, a metal block, or an old instrument part no longer fit for service. Its job now is modest, but it still keeps things straight. A report must sometimes be prepared for another office, and that brings a different kind of care. You copy the station name, the date, the hour, the snow depth, the water content, the temperature, and any remarks. You write Innsbruck clearly, because names must travel without losing themselves. The letters take shape slowly under your hand, and the ink darkens, then dulls as it dries. We can hear the pen's faint scratch, a small sound moving across a quiet afternoon. The city outside has many names within itself. There are formal names for offices and streets, familiar names for corners, remembered names for places where snow always lingers. Your work belongs to the formal world when it enters the report, but to the familiar world when your boots carry you to the gauge. You know where the gate sticks. You know where meltwater freezes by evening. You know which roof sheds snow suddenly when the sun reaches it. Knowledge gathers first in the feet. A telegraph clerk, if involved, may reduce the day to coated brevity. Weather travels well when shortened. Snow depth, temperature, pressure, and remarks can be compressed into marks that move along wire faster than any cart through the valley. Yet before that speed, there was your slow bend over the gauge. This contrast is easy to miss. The rapid message depends on the unhurried observation. Speed begins with stillness, and the wire begins with snow. You step to the window while the ink dries. Below, the street has become a layered surface, no longer the clean white of dawn. Tracks cross tracks. Shovel piles slump at the edges. The clean snow on sills remains brighter, protected from wheels and feet. A roofline sheds a narrow curtain of powder that flashes in the light and then vanishes against the wall. You watch without needing to record it, letting the eye rest on motion that does not ask for action. There is a softness in being responsible for something small. The whole winter is too large for one pair of hands. The mountains are too large, the clouds too large, the valley too varied. But the gauge plot, the can, the ruler, the ledger, the report, these are within reach. You tend them, and through tending them, you touch the larger season. We can let that thought remain simple, because it does not need to be made grand to feel true. Sometimes a visitor asks whether the snow is unusually deep. It is an ordinary question, and you answer by memory first, then by the ledger if needed. Unusual compared with yesterday, perhaps. Not unusual for January, if it is January. Heavy for the lower streets, lighter than the old winter 3 ledgers back. The past becomes practical in your hands, not a museum thing, but a way of giving today its proper size. You learn to answer gently, with measure. The visitor may be surprised that snow has to be measured in more than one way. You might explain, if there is time, that depth tells how high it lies, while melted water tells what it contains. You might mention that wind can deepen a drift and bare a nearby patch. You might say that a level open place is needed, and that even then, judgment matters. The explanation is plain, and the visitor nods, but soon forgets the details. You do not mind. Forgetting is part of quiet work. What remains for the visitor is perhaps the image of you near the table, sleeves brushed with snow, pencil behind the ear or tucked into the coat, speaking softly about depth and meltwater. It may not stay long. The day has other claims. But for a moment, the hidden labor of winter becomes visible. Then the door closes, the room settles, and you return to the page. The gauge waits outside, and the afternoon continues with its low light. By now, your hands have warmed fully, and the earlier stiffness is only a memory in the joints. You take the dry gloves from the peg and turn them once, checking the seams. A torn glove can let in snow, and snow against the skin steals attention from the eye. It is strange how much accurate work depends on bodily comfort. A warm hand writes better, lifts better, notices better. The snow gauge man is not separate from the weather measured. You are inside it, always. You may keep a second notebook for rougher observations. It is smaller than the ledger, more private, with quick notes made outdoors when there is no time to form perfect lines. Wind from the north, fine crystals, settling by noon, children near fence, roof snow falling from east side. Such notes may later be folded into official remarks, or they may simply help you remember the behavior of a particular day. The notebook smells of graphite, cloth, and faint damp. This small book is where your voice comes closest to the work. Official records prefer neatness. The pocket notebook allows weather to arrive as fragments, the way it is felt. A gust against the cheek, a crust under the boot, a darker band of cloud above the valley. You do not write poetry there. And yet, if someone found it long afterward, they might feel winter more strongly from those quick notes than from any polished report. Plain words can carry weather. Innsbruck itself presses close around the job. The river keeps moving under winter's surface, cold and green where it can be seen. Bridges gather slush at their edges. Church towers hold snow on ledges that birds disturb. The old streets narrow the wind, then release it into squares where it circles and drops what it carries. As you walk through this city, you are not apart from it. Your measurements belong to its stones, roofs, chimneys, and breadth. The 1910s bring other noises into the valley too. Trams, trains, bicycles, military boots in some years, and the hard talk of a world changing beyond the gauge plot. Yet snow continues to fall in its old manner, softening uniforms, shop signs, roof tiles, and station platforms alike. You may hear news in the cafe or from a clerk, but when morning comes, the gauge does not ask what the newspapers say. It asks how much snow settled in the night. That can be a comfort. Routine does not erase the world, but it gives the hands a way through it. You wake, dress, step out, read, melt, write, Check, send, clean, and prepare. The order holds even when other orders feel uncertain. We can understand that without naming every trouble of the decade. The Snow Gauge Man's peace is not ignorance, it is the steadiness of a task that remains small enough to do well. Late in the afternoon, a colder tone enters the light. Shadows from the fence stretch across the yard, blue and long, and the surface of the snow loses its sparkle. You step outside for another look, taking the small notebook this time rather than the full equipment. The air smells cleaner now, less of coal and more of frost, though a faint smoke still lies near the chimneys. Your boots press into earlier tracks that have hardened around the edges, and each step gives a crunch. The gauge plot appears undisturbed. That is what you hoped, though you never assume it before looking. You check the fence, the can, the stake, and the open patch in the same order as always. Repetition prevents missed details. It also soothes the mind. When the body knows the sequence, thought can move slowly, like a lamp carried from one familiar corner to another. We stay inside that sequence, because its calm is part of why the work suits the night. A few flakes begin to fall, though the sky above the rooftops is not fully closed. They are small flakes, dry and separate, visible only when they cross a dark wall or the sleeve of your coat. You hold still and watch them land. One rests on the wool near your wrist, a tiny branching shape for an instant, then sinks into the fabric's dark threads. The next measurement has already begun, though it will not be written until its proper hour. You do not rush back indoors. A snow gauge man learns to stand in weather without making an event of it. You listen to the flakes touch the surface, a sound almost too slight to be called sound, more like the absence of disturbance. In the lane, voices lower as people turn their collars up and hurry toward warmth. The day is folding itself inward. You make a short note about the new fall, then close the book beneath your coat to keep it dry. When you return, the room receives you with its familiar dimness. The window no longer gives enough light for fine writing, so you tend the lamp. The match flares with a sulfur scent, quick and sharp. Then the flame steadies behind the glass. You lower it until the light is warm but not smoky. The lamp changes the room's color, making the metal gauge parts amber at the edges and turning the paper cream. Evening work begins in this glow. The report from earlier may need sealing. You fold the paper along a clean crease, press it flat, and tuck it where it will be collected or sent. If wax is used, it warms near the flame and gives off a faint resin smell. If paste is used, it has its own mild sourness. These office scents are part of the winter day too, not as vivid as snow or coal smoke, but steady, human, and close to the hands. You seal the day's message with care. Few people later will imagine that a snow measurement involved so many textures. They may think only of a number. But you have touched wool, metal, glass, paper, wood, ice, leather, and flame before the day is through. You have moved between cold and warmth so often that each has become clearer. The cold sharpens the air outside. The warmth loosens the body inside. Between them, your work passes back and forth, making a quiet bridge of habit. There may be an evening reading if snow continues, or at least an evening inspection before darkness takes the plot fully. You prepare for that possibility without complaint. The rule is near the door, the notebook is in its pocket. The lamp can be carried if needed, though lamplight changes snow, making shadows deeper and marks harder to judge. Better to use the last natural light when you can. The sky beyond the window has become a dull, thick pewter. You sit for a moment while waiting. This waiting is not idleness. It is part of weather work. Snow asks for patience, because it arrives over time, settles over time, and changes even while being watched. You fold your hands loosely and hear the room around you. The low stove, the tiny settling sounds of cooling metal, the muffled wheels outside, the soft rub of your sleeve when you shift. Nothing announces itself. Everything simply continues. The old chair supports you with a slight unevenness you know well. One leg is shorter, or the floor is not level, and you have learned the small angle at which it rests best. Through the wall comes a murmur from another room, perhaps clerks finishing their work, perhaps someone laughing quietly at a private joke. You do not need to join them. Your attention remains half with the window, where the flakes have thickened just enough to show against the darkening street. At last, you rise, put on the gloves, and take the lantern. The flame moves inside its glass as you open the door, leaning away from the draught. Outside, the evening has softened the city again. Footprints from the day are filling at their edges, and the harder tracks are being covered by a new skin of white. You lift the lantern low, not too close to the gauge, and let its light touch the fence posts, the boardwalk, and your own boots. The falling snow changes the way distance feels. Buildings seem farther away, though they have not moved. Sounds arrive without edges. A tram bell rings somewhere beyond the veil, and its tone is rounder than usual. You walk slowly, because the boardwalk is slick beneath the fresh fall, and because haste has no use here. The lantern handle is cold through the glove, but the glass gives off a small warmth near your knuckles. We come again to the gauge. You do not take a full measurement, unless the schedule calls for it. But you check the accumulation since afternoon with your eye, and with the marks already known. The new snow lies lightly, not yet compacted, a thin, fresh layer over the older surface. You note that it began before evening and continues. This may matter when tomorrow's morning depth is read, because the night's fall will include what began before dark. Time, like snow, needs careful edges. A gust moves through the yard, gentle but definite, and the flakes slant for a few breaths. You turn your body slightly to shield the notebook as you write. The pencil moves more slowly in cold air, or perhaps your fingers do. The words do not need beauty. They need to be clear enough for later. Light snow continuing, slight wind, no disturbance at gauge. You close the book, press it under your coat, and stand a little longer in the falling. This is one of the hidden pleasures of the work. You have a reason to stand outside when others go in. Not a dramatic reason, not a lonely exile, just a small duty that lets you witness the city entering snow again. Windows glow on the far side of the lane. A person passes with a scarf over the mouth, face lowered, footsteps brief and careful. Snow gathers on the brim of your cap, and you feel its faint weight as a private crown. The gauge itself seems almost asleep. Its marks remain visible, though softened by lantern light. The collecting can waits open to the sky, receiving flake after flake without sound. This receiving is the center of the whole day. You can tend, write, compare and explain, but the instrument's plain task is to stand correctly and accept what comes. Perhaps that is why the scene feels restful. Nothing is being forced. The snow falls. The gauge receives, and you watch. When the inspection is done, you return by the same careful path. Your tracks from a few minutes earlier already look less sharp. The new snow is covering your presence as soon as you make it. That too is part of why few know this job. The worker's evidence disappears quickly. Footprints soften. Breath vanishes. Wet cuffs dry. Ledgers keep the results, but not the sound of your steps crossing the yard beneath evening snow. We keep listening for that sound. Inside, you set the lantern down and close the door against the weather. For a moment the room seems too warm, almost close, and your glasses, if you wear them, would fog at once. You shake snow from your shoulders before it melts into the coat. The flakes fall to the floor as tiny bright specks, then become water so quickly they seem to have been imagined. Your gloves go back to their place. The notebook comes out, cool against your palm. You copy the evening note into the appropriate place. The lamp hums faintly, and the flame throws a small shadow of your hand across the page. Outside, the snow continues without asking to be watched. That is another comfort. The work does not depend on constant attention, only on attention at the right moments. You can let the sky do what it will between readings. Your task is to return, again and again, with a ready eye and a steady hand. Supper may be simple, taken at home or nearby, depending on your arrangement. A bowl of soup, dark bread, perhaps potatoes, perhaps cabbage, perhaps a little sausage if the week allows. The steam rises into your face and carries salt, onion, and the deep warmth of something cooked slowly. After a day in snow, even plain food feels generous. You eat without hurry, because the body has been carrying winter since before dawn, and it receives warmth with quiet gratitude. If you live near the station, the path home is part of the routine. You know the lamps, the gutters, the doorstep where ice forms, the corner where wind pushes snow into a low ridge. You pass shops closing their shutters and hear bolts slide into place. From one window comes the smell of coffee, from another, the faint sound of a piano being practiced slowly, the same phrase repeated until it settles. The whole town is doing its own evening measuring. At home, the work does not entirely leave you. Snow taps the window or brushes it, depending on the wind. You may wake in the night and listen, judging by sound whether the fall has thickened, whether sleet has mixed in, whether thaw has begun. This is not anxiety, it is familiarity. A baker knows dough by touch, a carpenter knows timber by grain, and you know winter by the way it speaks softly against glass. Your rest has a listening edge. Still, sleep comes. The body that has walked cold yards and bent over marks knows how to loosen. Boots stand near the door with drying soles. The coat hangs heavy, smelling faintly of wool, smoke, and outdoor air. Your notebook lies where morning hands will find it. Beyond the window, Innsbruck receives the night's snow in silence, roof by roof, rail by rail, fence post by fence post. You do not need to watch every flake. The gauge is waiting. Before dawn, there is the particular darkness of a winter morning before work. It is not the deep night of midnight, but a thinner darkness, already expecting light somewhere behind the mountains. You wake to it with the knowledge of snow before you see it. The room is colder at the edges. The air feels muffled. The world beyond the window gives back less sound than usual. You lie still for a breath, and we begin again inside that quiet. Dressing is a measured process. Shirt, waistcoat or sweater, coat, scarf, socks, boots, gloves, cap, each layer chosen not for display but for service. The wool may be scratchy at the neck, and the boots may resist until warmed by the foot. You tie the laces firmly, because loose boots gather snow and make clumsy work. The pencil goes where it belongs. The notebook follows. The body becomes ready by sequence, and the sequence itself is soothing. When you open the door, the new snow shows itself before the street does. It has softened every familiar edge. Steps are rounded. The fence has a white rail. The cart tracks from yesterday are gone. The air smells clean and a little metallic and very cold. No one has crossed the nearest patch yet, so your first footprints enter the morning with a slow, deliberate sound. We are back with the 1910s Innsbruck Snow Gauge Man, where the day begins in white. This morning's reading will carry the evening fall, the nightfall, and whatever settling happened between them. You keep that in mind as you approach the gauge. The lantern may still be needed, or perhaps the eastern sky gives enough pale light to see the marks. Your breath clouds the rule if you lean too close, so you turn your face aside for a moment and wait. Even breathing must be managed gently around precise work. The snow surface waits, smooth and untroubled. You take the depth at the marked point. The rule descends through the fresh layer, then into the older settled snow beneath it, and the feeling through your hand changes slightly. Fresh snow offers little resistance. Older snow is firmer, grainier, more compact. You read the total depth, then take a separate sense of the new fall, because both may be needed. The gauge does not speak in one voice. It speaks in layers, and your hand learns to hear them. The collecting can is lifted with care. Snow has mounded slightly above the rim, and you must preserve what belongs there without letting loose crystals tumble away. You slide a flat piece across if the method calls for it, or otherwise handle the top with the caution taught by practice. A few flakes land on your sleeve and remain distinct. The metal feels heavier than yesterday, or perhaps your morning fingers are not yet awake. You hold it level, close to the body. The walk back indoors seems longer when carrying a full sample. You choose each step, avoiding ruts hidden beneath the new fall. Snow creaks underfoot, that high dry sound that tells you the cold has deepened. A cart has not yet passed. The town is still mostly inside, behind curtained windows and banked stoves. This is the hour when your work feels most nearly invisible and most completely itself. We move with you through the blue. Inside, the sample begins its slow change. Snow in a can looks like abundance, but it will settle and melt into a quieter amount. You set it away from direct heat at first, letting the room temper the metal. Too much haste could spill, splash, or leave crystals clinging where they should be counted. You unwrap your scarf and hear the little crackle of frost loosening from the wool. Your cheeks warm slowly, and the notebook opens to a clean page. You write the new depth with a steadier hand than you had outside. Then you add the time and the condition of the snow. Fine dry snow, light wind overnight. No visible disturbance. These words are plain, but they hold the night. They hold the flakes against the lantern, the muted street, the softened tracks, the cold before dawn. The official language is narrow, yet if you listen closely, even narrow language can carry the breath of a morning. The sample melts while you prepare other entries. A thin ring of water appears first at the edge, then widens. Islands of snow slump and turn translucent. The room is quiet enough that you can hear a small drip from the can's outer surface onto the tray. You do not hurry it. The snow spent hours falling. It may take a little time to become water for the glass. Patience is not added to the work. Patience is the work. When enough has melted, you swirl the container gently so no part remains clinging to the side. The motion is small, almost like rinsing a cup after tea. You pour into the measuring cylinder and let the water settle before reading. The surface trembles, then becomes still. You lower your eye to the mark. Here is the night, reduced to a clear line in glass, and yet not diminished, because this too is one form of its truth. You record the water content beside the snow depth. Together, they tell a more complete story. A deep light fall may be beautiful, but less heavy with future meltwater. A shallow wet fall may matter more to drains, fields, and river watchers. Your record helps sort those possibilities without drama. It gives the valley a way to remember what kind of snow arrived, not only how white the morning looked from the window. This is quiet knowledge. As the city wakes, a messenger or clerk may come for the report. Boots stamp at the door. A sleeve brushes snow from a cap. A greeting passes, brief and warm enough for winter. You hand over the copied sheet, and for a moment your morning's labor changes hands. The paper is light, almost nothing. Yet it carries the cold yard, the careful rule, the melted sample, the remarks, and the station name. Innsbruck travels outward in that fold. Once the report leaves, the day does not feel finished. It rarely does. There are instruments to reset, supplies to dry, paths to keep, and later readings to consider if the snow continues. You clean the cylinder with water, then dry it with a cloth that leaves no lint. The glass must be clear for the next reading. Held to the light, it shows a few streaks, so you polish again. The second polishing is not fussiness. It is respect for tomorrow's measurement. You also check the height of the gauge mouth above the surrounding surface. As snow deepens, instruments may need adjustment, or the area may need careful management so the gauge remains useful. Snow can climb the world slowly, hiding the lower parts of fences and making familiar distances strange. A post that stood tall in November may look shorter by February. You notice such changes because the station is not a fixed idea. It is a place living through the season. In a heavy winter, paths become corridors. Snowbanks grow beside them, first low as a boot, then high as a knee, then higher if the storms continue. The sound inside a path like that is different, enclosed and close. Your shoulders nearly brush the sides. The air is colder at the bottom, and the sky becomes a strip overhead. Even then, the gauge must be reached cleanly. You keep the way open, not broad, just enough for careful steps. Shoveling near a snow gauge is delicate work. You cannot throw cleared snow where it may drift back into the measuring area, and you cannot scrape so roughly that the ground nearby is changed beyond usefulness. The shovel edge bites into packed layers with a muted chop, and your breath deepens under the effort. This is one of the more bodily parts of the job, and it warms you quickly. Snow measurement may seem still from outside, but it contains real labor. After shoveling, you stand and listen to your own breathing slow. Steam rises from your scarf. The shovel handle has left a pressure across your palms, and the shoulder muscles remember the lift. You lean the shovel where it will not fall, then brush stray snow from your sleeve. The gauge plot lies clear enough, not perfect, but tended. We can pause with you there, in the white corridor, while the morning light grows stronger above the banks. A passing worker might call that there will be more snow by evening. You answer perhaps, or perhaps only lift a hand. Everyone in winter becomes a little bit a weather observer. People judge the sky by their errands, their roofs, their animals, their firewood, their roads. Your difference is that you must turn judgment into a record, and you must do it even when the answer seems obvious to every raised collar in the street. The obvious still deserves a measure. Inside, your coat dries again, and the room takes on the smell of exertion under wool, not unpleasant, only human. You open the window briefly to clear the damp air, and cold enters in a clean sheet. Papers lift slightly at the corners. The lamp flame leans. Then you close the window and return the room to its working stillness. The contrast wakes the senses without raising the spirit too high. Cold and warmth continue their slow exchange around you. There are days when the snow does not fall, and the work becomes observation of absence. These days matter too. You still visit the gauge. You still read the settled depth. You still note crust, thaw, compaction, or no change. A blank in the sky is not a blank in the record. The snowpack changes even under clear weather, especially when sun touches one face of the valley and leaves another locked in shade. Nothing much happens, and yet the season moves. On such clearer days, Innsbruck may shine almost sharply. The mountains stand out with dark trees and white gullies, and the river takes a harder color beneath the bridges. Sounds travel farther. A hammer at a distant shed may ring as if close by. The snow surface glitters, not with drama, but with countless small points of light. You shade your eyes and read the gauge, aware that brightness can make the mark harder to judge. Even beauty must be handled with care. Thaw days are different. The air smells of wet stone, horse manure, coal smoke, and loosened earth beneath the snowbanks. Drips begin everywhere, from roofs, eaves, cart bodies, and the undersides of bridges. The gauge plot settles unevenly if the sun reaches part of it, and you become watchful in another way. Water runs where snow had seemed solid. Street edges darken. The sound of the town changes from crunch to splash. Your notes grow longer because thaw has many voices. You may write crust, softening, wet surface, or rapid settling. Each word has a feel in the hand. Crust means the surface bears briefly before breaking. Softening means the rule enters differently. Wet surface means the snow has begun to lose its dry air. Rapid settling means yesterday's depth is becoming today's lower number without any disappearance as simple as sweeping. You are not just measuring height. You are watching a material change its nature under light. The science is close enough to touch. Snow is not a single substance in practice, though it is made of frozen water. It is flakes, grains, air spaces, crusts, layers, melt channels, refrozen surfaces, and little bridges between crystals. You do not need every formal term to work well, though some may appear in manuals and conversations. Your fingers and rule learn the same lessons in another language. They learn powder, pack, crust, slush, and ice. In the office, those differences become remarks. Outdoors, they are sensations. Powder brushes away like meal. Wet snow clings to the shovel and darkens the glove. Crust cuts at the edge of a boot print. Refrozen slush rings underfoot with a hard sound. You carry these textures back to the desk, and some small portion of them enters the page. The rest remains stored in your body, ready to help tomorrow's judgment. We might call that memory, but it is also skill. Skill is why the snow gauge man does not feel like a mere collector of numbers. Anyone might glance at a post. Not everyone knows when to distrust a drift, when to add a remark, when to recheck a reading, when to wait for the sample to settle, or when a strange value is weather rather than mistake. These are quiet decisions. They leave no flourish. They make the record steadier by preventing small errors from becoming habits. In the 1910s, manuals and official instructions provide the shape of the work, but daily practice fills in the spaces between instructions. A manual can say to measure at a set hour, in an open place with proper exposure. It cannot fully describe the way a particular Innsbruck fence collects snow during a north wind. It cannot know the roof that sheds at mid-morning, or the lane where children drag sleds too close. That knowledge belongs to you. Afternoon returns, and with it, the low tasks that keep a station alive. You mend a loose tag on an instrument case, trimming the twine with your knife. You replace a blotter that has absorbed too many damp marks. You set a spare pencil near the door. The workroom is a nest of readiness. Nothing here is arranged for admiration. Everything is placed to reduce confusion when cold, darkness, or falling snow makes the simplest task harder. Order becomes a form of kindness. A sound of bells crosses the city, softened by the weather. You cannot always tell which bell at first, because snow changes distance and direction. It may be a church bell, a school bell, a signal from the street, or only metal struck somewhere beyond the houses. The exact source matters less than the way it lays time over the afternoon. You glance at the clock and know when the next outdoor look should happen. Time and snow meet again in your routine. You take the lantern down before it is needed, checking the oil. The smell is faint but distinct, a little sharp, a little greasy, and it clings to the fingers if you spill even a drop. You trim the wick so the flame will burn clean. A smoky lantern can blacken the glass and make a poor companion in falling snow. Preparation is easier now than in the dark. Your future self is always present in this work, waiting for the care you give now. The idea of a future self may sound modern, but you understand it plainly. Tomorrow morning's hands will need dry gloves. Tonight's eyes may need clear lantern glass. Next week's report may need today's note about drifting. So you do small favors across time. You lay tools straight. You write legibly. You leave paths open. The person helped by this may be you, or a clerk, or someone unknown years ahead. But the gesture remains the same, a patient act of forethought. Sometimes, while copying entries, you think of the measurement chain beyond Innsbruck. A snow reading from your valley may be compared with one from a pass, another from a monastery garden, another from a railway station, another from a farm. Each observer has a different room, a different stove, a different pair of boots, a different view from the window. Yet the rows meet on paper, and their separate mornings become a shared winter across the region. That shared winter helps people plan in ways that are not always visible. Roads, trains, water, roofs, fields. and later spring flows all depend on what snow has stored in the high and low places. Your contribution is modest, but modest does not mean empty. A single daily reading cannot tell everything. Many daily readings, kept with care, begin to show patterns. The pattern is the slow reward of repetition, and repetition is the heart of your job. Evening approaches again with a grey softness at the window. The day has not been dramatic, and that is exactly its shape. You have measured, melted, written, checked, cleaned, prepared, and watched. These verbs may sound small in a list, but lived slowly, they fill the hours with texture. Your shoulders know the coat, your hands know the can, your eyes know the mark. We remain beside you as the room darkens and the lamp becomes necessary. You turn the lamp slightly so its light falls across the ledger instead of into your eyes. The glass chimney carries a faint haze from earlier use, and when you wipe it with a cloth, the room brightens by a small degree. That small degree is enough. You can see the ruled lines clearly, the dark entries from the morning, and the narrow places where tomorrow's words will rest. Outside, Innsbruck is lowering itself into evening, while your table holds a pool of warmth. The snow beyond the window is no longer blue or white, but something in between, a dim surface that gathers whatever light the houses give it. You hear a door close down the street, then the soft scrape of someone clearing the threshold before night. That sound joins the room without disturbing it. You lay the pen aside, flex your fingers, and listen as the stove settles. We stay here because the quiet after the work is still part of the work. A station is not only active when the observer stands at the gauge. It is active while tools dry, while ink sets, while snow falls unseen in darkness, while the prepared page waits beneath a paperweight. Your responsibility stretches gently through these intervals. You do not need to watch every moment, yet the knowledge of the gauge remains somewhere in you, like a clock that does not tick aloud. The day has folded, but its measurements are still becoming tomorrow. If snow is falling steadily, you may step out once more before sleep, not to make the full record, but to understand the night's beginning. The coat goes back on, heavier now from having dried and cooled. The scarf has a faint smell of your own breath and outdoor air. You lift the lantern with the hand that knows its balance, open the door with the other, and let the cold enter around you. It touches the face first, then the wrists, then the lungs. The yard has taken on the private feeling of winter darkness. The lantern shows only what is near, a ring of fence, a plank, the slope of disturbed snow beside the path. Beyond that ring, the city withdraws into muffled lamps and vague roofs. Each falling flake appears suddenly in the light, bright for an instant, then gone into the ground. You walk slowly, because night snow confuses distance, and because your own shadow moves beside you like another quiet observer. The gauge stands where it should, receiving the night without complaint. You check the rim by sight, not touching it unless you must. A touch can loosen snow that should remain, or add warmth where none belongs. The rule stays in your pocket unless the schedule asks for a reading. Tonight, perhaps, you only confirm that the fall is clean and the wind remains light. That is enough. Knowing when enough has been done is also part of skill. For a moment, you lower the lantern and let your eyes adjust beyond it. The snow itself gives a little light, even under cloud. You can make out the white plane of the gauge plot, the darker posts, the soft roof lines, and the faint upward glow from street lamps beyond the lane. Your ears take in what your eyes cannot. A wheel far away, a cough from a doorway, a shutter latch, the tiny hiss of flakes against your sleeve. The whole city seems to breathe. This is the kind of scene no official record keeps. The report may say snow continued overnight with light wind. It will not say that the lantern warmed your knuckles, or that a flake settled on your eyelash and melted before you blinked, or that the fence cast a shadow like blue thread across the surface. Yet those things are not wasted. They are part of the attention that makes you careful. They keep the work from becoming merely mechanical. Back inside, you set the lantern down where the heat will not crack the cold glass. You do not rush to remove the coat. First you write the note. because memory is clearest before comfort arrives. Snow steady, wind light, gauge clear. These words sit at the bottom of the page like a small lamp of their own. Then the coat comes off, the gloves open, and the room slowly takes you back from the night. Your shoulders loosen with relief. Sleep, when it comes, does not close the winter completely. It only softens it. Somewhere in the night, snow accumulates on the gauge rim, on the roofs, on the silent carts, on the rails that will need clearing before morning. Your body rests, but the station keeps receiving. This is one of the strange comforts of measurement. You have done your part for the hour, and the instrument does its plain receiving without you. The world continues gently beyond your eyes. Before dawn, the dark is thick and close. You wake to the same thought that may have found you in sleep. Snow. Not alarm, not urgency, only recognition. The room is cool, and the blanket holds warmth in a small private climate around you. For a few breaths, you do not move. You listen. The street outside is muffled so deeply that even your own shifting seems loud. Then the day begins to gather itself around your hands. You dress by touch more than sight. The familiar layers come in their order, each one taking you nearer to the outdoor air. A button resists, then slips through. A bootlace has stiffened near the end. The scarf wraps twice, soft at one edge and rough at another. You take the notebook and pencil without needing to look for them. The habit has become a path inside the room, just as your footprints make a path outside through snow. When the door opens, the night's work appears. The new snow has risen over the old tracks, rounded the shovel banks, and settled on the fence in a smooth ridge. The air is very still. It smells of cold wood, coal smoke held low, and the clean mineral scent that comes before sunrise in a snowbound town. Your first step sinks deeper than yesterday's, and the sound is soft, almost private. We walk again into the 1910s Innsbruck morning, where the gauge waits in silence. The lantern is needed at first, though the eastern sky is beginning to pale behind the roofs. Its light meets the snow and comes back upward, so your coat and hands glow faintly as you move. At the boardwalk, you pause to judge whether drifting has crossed it. A thin ridge lies along the left edge, shaped by the night's faint wind. You keep to the right, where the planks remain clearer, and the wood answers your steps with a low creak. At the gauge, you stand still before bending. This pause matters. It lets your eye take in the whole scene before attention narrows to a mark. The surface is smooth, except for a slight feathering near the fence, and the can appears properly filled, not scoured or buried. You note the wind's small hand in the pattern. Then you bring out the rule, keeping it vertical, and lower it through the fresh snow with a practiced, unhurried motion. The depth is greater this morning, though not by surprise. You expected it from the night's silence. The rule touches the older layer beneath, and through the wood you feel the difference between fresh fall and settled base. You read once, then again, because the lantern's shadow can make a mark seem higher or lower than it is. The second reading agrees. You breathe away from the rule, write the figure, and shelter the page with your body. The pencil moves slowly in the cold. Snowflakes still fall, but more sparsely now. A few land on the open notebook, and you brush them off before they can melt and blur the paper. This is a small race that never feels hurried, because it has happened so often. Your glove edge, the page, the flakes, the pencil, each has its own pace. You add a remark about overnight snow and light drifting. The words are short, but behind them lies the whole soft labor of the night. The collecting can is heavier today. You lift it with both hands, level and close, careful not to knock the rim against your coat. Snow crowns the top slightly, and the crown must be preserved until it can be dealt with properly indoors. You feel the weight not only in your hands but in your forearms and shoulders. Winter has substance. It is not merely whiteness. It can be carried, melted, measured, and written into a row of ink. The return path demands attention. Fresh snow has hidden yesterday's slick places, and the boardwalk edge is less clear. You place each foot where experience suggests the plank should be. The lantern swings once, gently, and you steady it before the light confuses the snow ahead. A window opens briefly above the lane, and someone shakes a cloth into the morning. A small shower of roof dust falls far from your path. The city is waking into the same white day. Inside, the can goes onto its tray, and the room begins the transformation from snow to water once more. You remove your gloves finger by finger, and the skin beneath looks pale from cold. Your breath still comes strongly from the walk, and it fogs the air near the lamp before fading. The stove is banked low, so you tend it, adding coal or wood as the place requires. Heat builds with a slow iron smell, and the sample waits in patience. The fresh snow collapses inward as it warms. It does not melt evenly. Little caves form along the metal wall, and the center slumps in a soft hollow. You watch because watching teaches, even when the official step is simple. Dry snow keeps its shape longer than wet snow, then gives way all at once. Wet snow darkens and settles heavily. This morning's sample seems light for its depth, a powdery fall from colder air, and your eye begins to expect the measure. While it melts, you enter the depth in the ledger. The ink is dark and precise, and the ruled page steadies the hand. You write the station name again where needed, Innsbruck clear and even, because the place must remain attached to the reading wherever the paper travels. Outside, many people may simply say the snow is deep. Here, deep becomes a value, a time, a condition, a note, a place, and a line in the record. The water content confirms what your hands suspected. The snow was deep, but not heavy with water. You read the glass carefully, letting the surface settle, and write the value beside the depth. A future reader may see the difference and understand that the night brought a generous cover of light snow, beautiful on roofs and soft underfoot, but not the dense wet load that strains gutters and branches. The snow had volume, but less weight. Such distinctions make the quiet job useful. A town can feel snow emotionally, as beauty, nuisance, silence, or delay. A gauge helps the town know snow materially. How much water entered the valley's winter store, how much settled in the open, how quickly the layer compacted, whether thaw will make it run, or frost will keep it locked. You do not hold all these outcomes alone, but your morning value gives them a place to begin. By the time the report is ready, the windows have brightened. The street below shows new shoveling. A man clears a storefront in long strokes, pushing snow into a low bank at the curb. A woman steps around him with her skirt lifted slightly above the slush. Two children pause near the corner to press mittened hands into a fresh wall of snow, then hurry when someone calls from inside. Your gauge plot remains separate from such play and passage, a small island of care. You dry the can again after pouring, checking that no crystals remain tucked in the seam. Water hides in seams, freezes later, and changes the instrument's behavior in ways too small to excuse. The cloth grows damp, so you change it for another. You lay the used cloth near the stove, not too close, where steam will leave it slowly. Work like this is full of waiting for things to dry. Paper, gloves, cloth, wood, and wool all have their own timing. The station's timing meets the city's timing throughout the day. The morning report belongs to offices and messages. The midday inspection belongs to light and disturbance. The evening check belongs to darkness and preparation. Between them, you tend the small economies of tools and warmth. None of it asks to be admired. It asks only to be done in order. We can rest inside that order because it is steady without being hard and precise without being sharp. A municipal worker may stop by to ask about the fall, more for road sense than formal record. You tell him what you can in plain terms, deep but light, some drifting near fences, less water than the depth suggests. He nods, perhaps thinking of shovels, horse footing, cartwheels, or steps that must be cleared before trade can move properly. Your reading becomes practical in his mind almost at once. The number leaves the ledger and enters the street. This is one way the Snow Gauge Man is known briefly, then forgotten. People come when the snow affects their task. They ask, receive, and return to their own labor. The knowledge is used, and because it is used smoothly, its source fades. That is not a failure. Many useful things vanish into the ease they create. A cleared path is noticed less than a blocked one. A reliable measurement is questioned less than a doubtful one. Quiet competence tends to become invisible. You make no complaint about this. Complaint would be too large for the room. Instead, you set the pencil straight, check the ledger, and prepare the midday walk. The satisfaction is in the doing, not in being remembered for it. Still, we remember you here, not with applause, but with attention. We remember the snow under your boots, the line in the glass, the wet cloth by the stove, and the patient wait of the can. By midday, sunlight breaks through for a while, and the work shifts again. The fresh snow begins to glitter, and the air fills with tiny falling drops from eaves where warmth has reached. You step outside without the lantern, carrying only the small notebook. The brightness makes the town look newly made, but you know it is already changing. The soft morning surface is settling. Edges are sinking. Roofs are loosening their loads. The snow's first innocence is giving way to weather. At the gauge plot, the top layer has lowered slightly. This is expected, but you look carefully at how it has lowered. Smooth settling suggests the snowpack is compressing evenly. Uneven hollows may mean heat from below, disturbance from above, or drifting that hid the true surface. You do not measure formally unless needed, but you learn from the shape. The open patch still holds its calm, though sunlight has given it a faint crust that shines like sugar. A crow crosses the yard and lands on the fence, black against the snow. Its feet disturb the ridge on the rail, sending a little powder down outside the plot. It watches you with bright patience, then lifts away, leaving 2 small marks behind. You smile, perhaps, or only notice. Birds are part of the station's life, though they are not written unless they disturb the measure. The world touches your work in many ways, most of them too small for forms. You brush the fallen powder from the wrong side of the fence, keeping it away from the gauge ground. The broom handle is colder than expected, and the bristles leave fine lines in the loose snow. Each line catches light. You make the station tidy without trying to make it unnatural. A measuring place should not be overworked. Too much tidying can be another kind of disturbance. So you stop when the place is clear enough and let winter keep its texture. The city's sounds are sharper in the sun. Metal on metal from tram rails, a hoof slipping, then finding hold, shovel edges striking stone steps, voices carrying more clearly between buildings. Somewhere, a factory whistle or railway signal lays a longer note across the roofs. These sounds remind you that Innsbruck is not sleeping through winter. It is working through it, and your own work is one soft thread in that larger weave. In the afternoon, you may sort older sheets for storage. They must be dry before being placed with the season's record, or damp will stain and soften them over time. You fan a few pages near the stove, not so close that heat curls them. The paper smells faintly of ink and cold storage. Your hands move slowly over the stack, aligning edges, smoothing corners, checking that no page is missing. The past, too, needs small acts of care. A sheet from an earlier week shows a thaw you remember. The numbers fell quickly, and the remarks mention rain mixed with snow. You remember the sound of that rain, heavy on the older crust, and the way the street snow turned dark in ruts. Another sheet shows a clear cold spell, when the depth barely changed but the surface hardened each night. The entries awaken sensations in you. The ledger is not dry to the person who made it. To someone else, these pages may look plain. They may sit in a cupboard, tied with string, until a later clerk, engineer, teacher, or curious reader opens them. That reader may search for patterns and overlook the hands. It happens easily. Records invite the mind toward totals, averages, extremes, and dates. Yet each value had a morning, and each morning had a worker moving through air, light, tools, and bodily feeling. We keep that human thread visible. The phrase "snow gauge man" may sound almost too small for a life. You might have had other duties, other titles, other tasks in the office or station. Weather observation may have been part of a broader post rather than the whole of your day. But in these winter hours, the role becomes complete. The snow calls you out, the gauge receives you, the ledger waits for your hand. A person is sometimes known most truly by one repeated gesture. That gesture is bending close. Again and again, you bend close to a mark, a rim, a page, a glass line, a surface of snow. The body takes the shape of attention, back slightly curved, head lowered, breath turned aside, hands steady. The world becomes smaller for a moment. And because it becomes smaller, it becomes clearer. Sleepy work often has this gift. It narrows the mind gently, until only the next careful act remains before you. Outside, clouds gather again over the high places. You see them first as a dulling of light on the windowsill, then as a grey thickening above the roofs. The mountains disappear from their upper edges downward. Someone in the street looks up, judges the sky, and quickens a step. You do not quicken. You note the change, because cloud over the valley may mean more snow, or only shade, or a change in wind by evening. The sky asks for patience. You check the barometer if one is kept in the room. Its case may be wood, polished dark by years of dusting, with a glass face that reflects the lamp and window together. The needle moves slowly, never with the obviousness that impatient people want from instruments. You tap the glass lightly if that is the habit, then read it with the same care given to snow depth. Pressure is another part of the day's quiet conversation, another sign among signs. The barometer does not replace the cheek in the wind, or the eye on the cloud, or the boot in the snow. It joins them. That is how weather work feels at ground level. Instruments and senses do not compete. They lean toward the same question from different sides. You bring them together, not perfectly, but faithfully. A number, a note, a smell of thaw, a lowering cloud, a pressure change, a creak underfoot, all become part of your knowing. Late afternoon brings more flakes, few at first, then more steadily. They fall through the grey like ash made clean. The street darkens where people have walked, and brightens again where new snow covers the marks. You watch from the window before going out, giving the fall time to declare itself. Not every flurry deserves the same attention, but every flurry deserves to be seen. We stand there with you, the lamp behind us and the weather ahead, in a quiet balance. When you step outside, the air feels softer than it did in the morning. Not warm, but less biting. The flakes are larger now, and they cling to the coat instead of bouncing away. You hold out a sleeve and see them gather, star over star, losing their separate shapes as they touch the wool. Wetness may come later if the temperature rises. For now, they are soft and generous. The gauge plot begins a new layer under your watching eye. You make a note of the start time as closely as you can. In weather work, beginnings and endings are often approximate, because clouds do not ring bells when they open or close. You record what you know. Snow began in the afternoon, light at first, becoming steadier. The words are honest, and honesty is better than false precision. You cannot be everywhere at once. You can be attentive where you are. That is enough for the record. A cart passes slowly, wheels cutting through fresh snow into the harder layer below. The horse's breath rises in pale bursts. The driver sits hunched, blanket over the knees, hat brim whitened. The cart's passage leaves a track that will be softened within the hour if the fall continues. You watch it go, then return your attention to the gauge. The world is full of moving snow, but only some of it belongs to your measuring place. Inside again, the afternoon settles into lamplight earlier than usual. Snow clouds shorten the day. You trim the wick, place the notebook near the ledger, and prepare for another possible evening reading. The room feels enclosed, almost cabin-like, though the city surrounds it. Sounds from outside are reduced to thuds and murmurs. The stove's warmth becomes more noticeable against the dim window. Your hands rest on the table, and the wood beneath them is dry, worn, and familiar. There is a pleasure in a table known by work. You know the notch near the left edge, the ink stain that never fully lifted, the place where the glass cylinder must not be set because the surface slopes. Your hands find these details without thought. A stranger would see an old table. You feel a map of use. The snow gauge man's world is full of such maps, invisible to anyone who has not repeated the same careful actions through many mornings. The evening reading, when it comes, is done in falling snow. You carry the lantern lower than before, because large flakes close to the glass can blind you with their brightness. The path is already soft over the earlier tracks. Your boots sink quietly, and the snow brushes the tops as you move. At the fence, you pause to let a gust pass. Then you enter the plot area by the allowed path, keeping your shoulders turned so the notebook stays sheltered from the fall. Reading in snow is a conversation with interruptions. A flake lands on the mark. Your breath clouds the view. The lantern shadow shifts. You wait, adjust, and read again. There is no irritation in it, only the need to slow down until the conditions permit a clear number. The gauge is not hiding the truth. The weather is simply present while you measure it. You accept that presence, and your patience becomes part of the instrument's accuracy. You write with the notebook held close against your coat. The pencil leaves a darker line when the paper is cold, or perhaps it only seems that way in the lantern light. New snow since afternoon. Large flakes. Wind light to moderate. You may use the formal wording later, but here the rough note carries the feel of the moment. Snow collects on your shoulders and cap as you write. You can feel it accumulating, almost nothing at first, then a faint weight. The collecting will wait for the scheduled interval unless needed sooner. You check that it remains clear and properly exposed. The rim has a clean white edge, no roof fall, no thrown snow, no obvious drift intrudes. This is a good kind of uneventfulness. You stand with it briefly, lantern in hand, and listen. The large flakes fall with a presence you can almost hear, a soft touching everywhere at once. The yard seems held inside a white curtain. When you return indoors, the flame in the lantern has drawn a little soot onto the glass. You notice it and set the lantern aside for cleaning later. Not now, because the note comes first. The page receives the evening reading, the remarks, the time. Then you take off the coat and brush away the snow before it melts too deeply into the wool. Droplets darken the floorboards around your boots. The room smells suddenly of wet cloth and winter. A late meal may wait, or perhaps only tea. The cup warms your hand as you review the entries. Morning, midday, afternoon start, evening reading. The day is no longer a smooth memory. It is held in points. Those points do not break the day apart. They let it be understood. Snow fell, paused, settled, began again, thickened, and entered night. Your lines follow that movement as footsteps follow a path, spaced by the needs of the journey. There may be fatigue now, though it is a calm fatigue. The kind that sits in the shoulders and behind the eyes. Not sharp, just present. You have gone in and out of cold many times. You have bent, lifted, written, cleaned, watched, and waited. The body feels the repetitions. Yet there is satisfaction in knowing the instruments are ready, the notes are complete, and the gauge stands under the falling snow with its small duty protected. The day has been kept. Before leaving the workroom, you clean the lantern glass. The soot wipes away in grey swirls on the cloth. and the clear pane returns beneath. You trim the wick again, check the oil, and place the lantern where a half-awake hand can find it if the night requires. You straighten the rule by the door. You put the notebook in the inner pocket of the coat. These preparations are like laying down quiet promises for the next cold hour. The office darkens behind you as the lamp is lowered, not extinguished yet, perhaps, but turned down until the room rests in amber shadow. The table loses its edges. The ledger becomes a darker block. The metal instruments hold the last light along their rims. You stand for a moment, not because there is more to do, but because habit asks for one final look. The tools are in place. The papers are safe. The stove is settled. The room can wait. Outside, snow is still falling. It softens your path home and covers the tracks made only minutes before. The city is quieter now, with more windows lit and fewer people moving. Those who pass do so with heads lowered, each person enclosed in a small circle of breath and thought. You are one of them, carrying the day's weather in your notebook, in your coat, in the damp hems of your trousers, and in the tired steadiness of your hands. At home, you remove the boots slowly. Snow clings to the seams and falls in little lumps near the threshold. You set them where the meltwater will not spread across the floor. The socks are damp at the edges, and the skin beneath feels tender from cold and pressure. Such details rarely enter any account of a weather station, but they are part of the cost and comfort of the work. The body pays attention in ways the ledger cannot show. The night outside continues to write itself on the gauge. You may sit with a lamp at home, mending a glove, reading a few lines, or simply listening while the room grows warmer around you. Snow against a window has many sounds, depending on flake, wind, and glass. Tonight it is soft, with occasional faint taps where wetter flakes strike and slide. You hear it and know tomorrow's morning will begin before dawn, with the same careful walk into white. In the dark hours, the snow may change again. It may become finer. It may thicken. It may pause while clouds move over the valley, then resume when a new band arrives from the mountains. You do not know each change as it happens, but you know that the morning record will carry their combined result. This uncertainty is gentle because it has a method waiting for it. Whatever the night gives, you will meet it with rule, can, glass, paper, and care. Sleep comes with that method nearby, not in the room perhaps, but in the mind. The station exists, the gauge stands, the tools are ready. You have done what can be done before waking. Outside, Innsbruck is being covered and recovered, the snow taking roofs, streets, rails, signs, and fences into one quieter shape. Your breath slows beneath the blanket, while the night makes its soft deposit on the waiting rim. Morning arrives without a sharp edge. It is there first, as paleness behind the curtain, then as cold at the nose, then as the remembered need to rise. You dress again, a little more slowly, because the body knows the depth waiting outside. The coat is dry enough, the gloves serviceable, the boots stiff but ready. You take up the day's small instruments with the familiarity of prayer, though no ceremony is required. We return to the work through habit. The door opens onto deeper snow. The world has lost many of yesterday's distinctions. Curbstones, ruts, low steps, and small objects near walls have disappeared under a rounded cover. The air is still full of flakes, but lighter now, drifting rather than driving. The town seems to be holding its breath. Your own breath rises thickly, then thins. You step into the path you kept open, finding it half filled and still passable. The first sound of the day is muffled. At the station, the boardwalk is harder to see. You use the fence line in memory to guide your feet. Snow reaches the sides of the planks, and each step compresses the new layer with a soft push. You stop before the gauge and look carefully at the exposure. The fall has been generous, but wind has not spoiled the plot badly. A small drift leans near one corner, away from the marked point. You record it in your mind before touching the rule. The measurement takes longer in falling snow. You clear nothing from the measuring point except what should not be there, and even that with great caution. The rule passes through fresh depth, then older layers, and meets the base with a firm stop. You read the mark in the grey light, then read again from a slightly different angle. Agreement comes slowly, not because the gauge is uncertain, but because your eye refuses to hurry. The number enters the notebook with weight. The can is full enough that carrying it feels like carrying a portion of the night itself. Snow rounds over the top, delicate and easily lost. You move with both hands steady, elbows near the body, and the world narrows to the few steps between gauge and door. A person might pass nearby and greet you, but you answer only after the can is secure. Some moments ask for all the attention available. This is one of those quiet moments. Indoors, the sample sits like a small white hill in metal. You look at it before it changes, because once it melts, that shape will be gone. There is beauty in the temporary mound, in the way crystals cling to the rim, in the way the surface carries a slight depression from the lid or slide. Then the work continues. Beauty is allowed, but it does not interrupt the process. You set the tray level and begin the patient conversion to water. The ledger's page for this morning feels especially open. The entry will be larger, with remarks needed for continuing snow, depth, drifting, and perhaps visibility. You write slowly, leaving enough space. The pen or pencil moves with the sound that has become a companion. Outside, a shovel starts somewhere, then another. The city is answering the snowfall in many small laboring ways. Inside, you answer it with a line, a value, and a careful note. As the snow melts, you tend the stove, because the room's warmth must be steady enough for hands and instruments, but not so fierce that haste enters the work. The coal catches with a low crackle. A little smoke scent escapes before the draft takes it. You warm your fingers near the side, not too close, watching color return to the skin. The body is not separate from the record. A trembling hand reads poorly. So warmth becomes part of accuracy. The sample yields less water than its height suggested, though more than yesterday's lighter fall. You read the cylinder and enter the value. Then you pause, looking at the paired numbers, depth and water, surface and substance. The snow has a character, and today's character is beginning to show. Not the dry whisper of the earlier fall, not the heavy slush of Thaw, but a middle snow, soft, steady, and capable of building quietly over time. This is the sort of weather people remember as a snow day, but the Snow Gauge Man remembers it as a sequence. Evening start, night continuation, morning depth, water content, light wind, modest drift, ongoing fall. Sequence turns memory into something useful. It does not make the day less lovely. If anything, it lets the loveliness be handled more gently, because each part is noticed in its own place. We remain with the sequence as the morning opens. A clerk arrives later than usual, boots powdered white to the ankle. He apologizes perhaps, though there is no need. Snow has slowed everyone. You hand him the report, and he holds it carefully inside his coat. For a moment, the two of you stand near the doorway while cold air flows around his shoulders. You speak of the depth, the continued fall, the likely need for another update. The conversation is brief, practical, and warmed by shared weather. After he leaves, the room feels emptier. The report has gone outward, but the snow remains. This is often the case. Paper travels faster than shovels, faster than Thaw, faster than the day's fatigue. Your figures may reach another desk while the gauge outside is already gathering the next layer. There is no finality in sending a report. It is only one stitch in the long fabric of the season, and your needle returns again to the cloth. You prepare for additional observation by setting fresh pages ready. The pocket notebook is wiped at the cover, because damp has begun to darken one corner. You place it near warmth, then remove it before the pages curl. This judgment, too, has been learned. Too cold, and paper stiffens. Too warm, and it warps. Too damp, and pencil smears. A weather station is full of such middle choices, where the best state is neither one extreme nor another. Outside, the snow keeps falling through the day's growing light, and your next walk will come soon enough, after the stove settles, after the ink dries, after the tools are put back exactly where the morning found them, while Innsbruck continues slowly beneath its whitening roofs, and the gauge receives the next soft layer of time. The next walk begins after the room has been returned to readiness. You close the ledger, cover the inkwell, and take the smaller notebook, because falling snow makes a large book foolish outside. The coat is still damp at the shoulders, but warm from the room, and that brief warmth follows you into the yard. It fades as soon as the air touches it. The snow is falling in a patient, even manner now, not thick enough to blind, but steady enough to change the world while you watch. The path to the gauge has softened again. Your earlier footprints are shallow hollows, already rounded by new flakes. You step into them when you can, partly to protect the surrounding surface, partly because the feet remember their own work. The fence rail carries a clean white ridge that looks almost carved. A little snow has gathered on the latch, and when you lift it, the powder slides down over your glove like cold flour. We enter the measuring place with the same slow care. At the gauge plot, the fresh layer is easier to see against the older snow because it has not yet settled. It lies airy and clean, with a faint sparkle where the light finds individual crystals. You crouch, not to measure formally yet, but to study how the falling snow behaves near the instrument. The wind is barely there. Flakes descend almost straight, with only a slight lean from the northwest. You note that direction, feeling it first against the cheek before writing the word. The can is receiving well. That phrase may not sound like much, but to you it is a quiet satisfaction. No drift curls over the rim. No branch, roof, or wall is shedding into it. No passing shovel has thrown foreign snow nearby. The instrument stands in its small clearing, doing the plain work of being open to the sky. You stand beside it, doing the plain work of noticing whether its openness can be trusted. Between you and the can, there is a shared stillness. You write a short note with your body turned away from the falling snow. The pencil line is faint at first, so you press a little harder, careful not to tear the dampening page. The paper smells cold, a scent almost like dust and ice together. Your glove creases around the notebook, and a flake melts near your thumb, leaving a dark spot that spreads slowly into the fiber. You blot it with the edge of your sleeve and continue with patience. By the time you return indoors, the snow has gathered in the folds of your coat. You brush it away in the doorway, but some remains, hidden in seams and along the collar. It melts later, making small cold lines that run toward the lining. This is one of the quiet discomforts of the job. Nothing severe, nothing worth complaint. Only the steady intimacy of winter entering clothing by degrees. You hang the coat carefully, knowing it will need time to dry. The room now smells of damp wool again, and of warm paper, and of the stove working harder than before. You place the notebook open to the new entry, letting the damp mark breathe before closing it. Outside the window, flakes pass the glass in layers, near ones quick and large, farther ones soft and slow. The eye cannot count them, and it does not need to. The gauge will count them in its own way, through depth, through meltwater, through your next reading. A snow gauge man in 1910s Innsbruck learns to live between the immeasurable and the measured. Snowfall seems endless while it falls, too numerous for thought, each flake lost in the company of others. Then morning comes, or the scheduled hour comes, and the immeasurable becomes a mark on a rule, a level in glass, a line on paper. Something vast passes through a narrow procedure and becomes useful without losing all of its wonder. The afternoon remains grey. You prepare another report form in case the continued fall requires transmission. The paper is thin enough that the table's grain almost shows through when the lamp is close. You write the station name and leave space for the values. It is a simple act, but it steadies the coming hour. There is comfort in setting a place for future knowledge. The snow has not yet finished falling, but already the page waits to receive its shape. A person might think the work is repetitive because the actions return again and again. That is true, but repetition is not emptiness. The same act meets different conditions each time. The rule enters powder differently than crust. The can weighs differently after wet snow. The notebook behaves differently in dry cold than in damp thaw. Your own hands are different at dawn, noon, and evening. The ritual is repeated, so the differences can be noticed. Repetition makes change visible. Later, when the snow slackens, you go out for the proper reading. The flakes are fewer now, and the air has the washed quiet that follows a steady fall. The city seems padded at every edge. Even the street lamps, not yet lit, look softened by the snow on their caps. You carry the rule, the notebook, and the can cover or tool needed for handling the sample. Your steps are deliberate. Each one presses a small oval into the new surface. At the gauge, you read the new accumulation since the morning. It has grown, though less than the eye might have guessed from the long fall. Settling has already begun. Fresh snow carries much air, and as the hours pass, the delicate branches break, shift, and nest closer together. You see this not as theory, but as the difference between expectation and mark. The day has looked full of snow, but the rule speaks with a quieter number. You collect the sample for melting. This time the snow near the rim is slightly denser, perhaps because the afternoon air warmed. It clings more readily to metal. A few crystals stick to the tool and must be rinsed into the sample later, not brushed away carelessly. You notice the change by feel before any water value confirms it. The hand knows when snow is dry, when it is damp, when it is turning toward heaviness. This bodily knowledge is old. Inside, the melt takes less time than the morning sample. The snow darkens quickly, and water appears almost at once along the edges. You make a note of that. The glass cylinder receives the meltwater with a clearer stream, and the level rises a little higher than the depth alone would suggest. The afternoon snow carried more water in each measure of height. You record this beside the other values, and the day's character becomes more layered, more specific. Such changes within one day are easy to miss if no one is assigned to care. A morning of dry powder can become an afternoon of damp flakes, and by night the surface may crust if the temperature falls. People remember the whole period as a snowfall, one white event. Your ledger divides it gently into phases, not to complicate it, but to let it be known more truly. The winter day has a beginning, a middle, and a shifting texture. Outside, carts begin to move more easily as the snowfall lessens. Shovelers come out in greater number, and the streets fill with the rhythm of clearing. Metal shovels ring on stone, where snow has been scraped thin. Wooden ones push with a lower sound. Snow thrown from steps lands in soft heaps, then slumps. You hear all this through the window while writing, and you know that none of those piles must confuse tomorrow's gauge. The station must remain a separate witness. Toward evening, the clouds break low in the west, and a muted band of light touches the upper snowbanks. It is not golden exactly, more like pale straw laid across blue. The mountains remain hidden, but their presence is felt in the way the light stops and lifts. You stand at the window with the clean cylinder in your hand, watching the town pass from snowfall into aftermath. We can linger there, because aftermath has its own slow weather. After snowfall, the work becomes protection against disturbance. People are busier outdoors. Snow is shoveled, carted, trampled, packed, and sometimes thrown where it does not belong. Children discover every bank. Dogs make paths under fences. Roofs release their loads when the temperature changes. Your gauge plot becomes more vulnerable after the sky has quieted, not less. So you take the broom and step outside, prepared to guard the little clearing without making too much of it. The air has a damp edge now. Snow clings to the broom bristles, and the fence rail sheds in soft lumps when touched. You clear the boardwalk, not broadly, just enough to keep your route. The shovel piles nearby must remain away from the instrument, so you shape them with restraint. A passerby may wonder why you are so particular about where snow is placed. You could explain. Often you simply continue, because the arrangement itself is the explanation. The gauge plot looks calm under the evening light. The marks stand clear enough, and the can is reset. You inspect the surroundings. No thrown snow, no new drift across the measuring point, no sagging branch overhead. A small icicle has begun forming on the shed roof, catching the pale light at its tip. It may fall later, but not near the gauge. You notice it anyway, because an observer's eye learns to gather more than it presently needs. Back in the room, the day's several entries must be ordered. Morning depth, morning water, midday notes, afternoon fall, evening condition. Instrument reset. You check that times are consistent and remarks belong to the right line. A careless page can make a careful measurement difficult to use, so the writing receives the same attention as the snow. The table is quiet, the lamp steady, and your hand moves through the rows with methodical calm. This is where obscurity enters most gently. The better you do the job, the less you appear. A clear record lets others look past you toward the weather. That is proper, in a way. You are not trying to place yourself between the world and the reader. You are trying to make the world visible. Yet here, in this sleepful telling, we let the hidden worker remain visible too, because the hand that steadies the rule is part of the truth. Night comes, and with it the cooling of the fresh snow. If the sky clears, the surface may harden before morning. If cloud returns, it may stay soft. You think of this while lowering the lamp, because tomorrow's first step will tell you much. A crust has a different sound. Powder has a different give. Wet snow has a different smell when the thaw begins. You carry these possibilities with you, lightly, as one carries a tune almost remembered under the breath. The next morning, the air is colder again. The snow that was damp at evening has tightened overnight, and your boots find a faint crust over softer layers beneath. It breaks with a small, satisfying crack, then hushes as the foot sinks slightly. You notice the sound before the sky has fully brightened. The gauge plot holds the same crust, thin and shining. You bend close, because crust can lift or bridge in ways that confuse the reading if you do not take care. You lower the rule through it. There is a tiny resistance, then a break. The point passes into softer snow below and finds the base. You read the depth, aware that settling has lowered the surface since the previous evening. This is not loss exactly, it is change in structure. The snow has grown more compact, its crystals pressed and altered by time, cold and slight thaw. Your note will say settled crust, or words close to that, plain and useful. The can contains snow, affected by the same overnight cooling. Around its rim, a delicate hard edge has formed. You handle it gently, so the crust breaks into the sample, rather than away from it. Indoors, it melts more slowly at first, because the crust holds its shape stubbornly. Then it gives way. The water level tells part of the story, your remark tells another. Both are needed. A number without a note can become too smooth, while weather itself is always layered. You add the morning to the sequence. The ledger now shows a living snowpack, not a single fall. Fresh depth, added fall, settling, water content, crust. These are the stages of a winter surface becoming established. On the street, people may only say the snow is still there. In the station, you can see how it has aged. Snow ages quickly, though quietly, and your work is to notice those quiet changes before they disappear into the next storm. A clear day follows. Sun reaches the roofs and the upper walls, while the yard remains partly shaded. Drips begin from the eaves, slow at first, then steadier. Each drop makes a small hole where it lands in loose snow, or a dark bead where it strikes stone. The sound is delicate and persistent. You keep an eye on any dripping near the station, because water from roofs can spoil a natural surface. The gauge must remain under the open sky. The sunlight also reveals soot more plainly. Tiny black specks lie on the snow near chimneys and roads, especially where smoke settled during calm hours. You do not remove them unless they intrude on the instrument, but you notice them. Snow records the city's air as well as the clouds. Coal fires, horses, wheels, boots, and industry leave their faint trace on whiteness. Innsbruck's winter is not pure in a storybook sense. It is lived in, breathed through, and worked. That lived quality matters. Your job is not to measure an untouched Alpine dream. It is to measure snow where people actually need to know it. Near a city, in a valley, among roofs and roads. The mountains may appear clean and distant, but your gauge stands in the human world, with smoke, fences, paths, errands, and interruptions. The work becomes more interesting because of that. It asks you to separate the sky's gift from the city's handling of it. By midday, the crust softens in sunlit places. On shaded ground it remains firm, and the difference can be felt within a few steps. You walk from one patch to another and sense the shift through your soles. This is the valley in miniature. Warm face, cold face, open place, sheltered corner. A report cannot include every patch, but an observer who knows them can write better remarks. You carry the city's small climates inside your attention, like folded maps. The workroom window gathers condensation along the lower edge. Warm indoor air meets cold glass, and droplets form where your breath has joined the room's moisture. You wipe the sill so water does not reach the papers. The cloth comes away grey with dust and soot. Outside the snow shines. Inside the table waits. These contrasts are steady companions, clean and dirty, cold and warm, wet and dry, open sky and covered book, each pair meeting in your day. When a thaw continues, the snowpack lowers visibly. The gauge reading may change even without fresh fall, and that change must be recorded. You measure not only arrivals, but persistence and loss. The surface becomes granular, like coarse sugar. Footprints hold water at the bottom. Snowbanks slump away from walls, revealing dark, wet stone. The smell of the street grows stronger as the cover thins. You note settling, thawing, and exposed patches where they affect the station's setting. Thaw can be harder to measure calmly than fresh snow. Fresh snow feels like addition, while thaw feels like the world undoing your previous work. Yet the work is not undone. The record of yesterday remains, and today's lowering is its own fact. You are not preserving the snow in the yard. You are preserving knowledge of its changes. That distinction keeps the hands patient when surfaces become messy, when edges collapse, and when once clean paths turn to slush. Slush has a smell and sound all its own. It sucks at the boots, darkens leather, and leaves rims of dirty water along the trouser cuff. The shovel no longer scrapes powder but pushes weight. Cartwheels make wet grooves. The gauge must be handled with even greater care, because wet snow clings and drains, and water can be lost if the sample is treated roughly. Your movements slow, not from weariness alone, but from the need for precision. Inside, wet snow melts almost at once. The sample sinks into water with little ceremony, and the cylinder level may rise surprisingly high. People sometimes underestimate wet snow because it lacks the airy height of powder. You know better. It carries water densely, and it can matter greatly for streams, loads, and thaw. The glass makes that hidden weight visible. You read the line and feel again the quiet usefulness of turning appearance into measure. A rain shower may pass through during such a thaw. Rain on snow makes a soft, uneven patter, louder on crust, quieter on slush. It darkens the surface and speeds the settling. If rain enters the gauge, the record must make clear what was snow, what was rain, and what mixture fell. These distinctions can be difficult, especially near freezing. You observe as honestly as possible, because honesty is better than forcing weather into neat categories it did not keep. The sky does not always respect the forms. It sends sleet when the paper has a place for rain or snow. It sends wet flakes that melt on contact. It sends fine ice grains that behave like neither. You write remarks to bridge the gap between world and column. Mixed precipitation. Snow changing to rain. Rain on snowpack. These phrases are not decorative. They keep the record from lying by simplicity. The snow gauge man becomes a translator of messiness. During colder spells, the work changes back toward dryness. The slush freezes overnight, hard and uneven, and the morning path becomes a field of ridges. Your boots find old footprints turned solid as stone. The gauge plot may hold a hard crust that must be read with care. The collecting can may have frozen edges. Metal bites the fingers more sharply in such cold, and the breath seems to fall away faster. Yet the routine remains, a steady path through difficulty. You carry warm water sometimes for cleaning, never for altering the measurement, only for freeing what must be freed after the sample has been secured. Even that must be done thoughtfully. A frozen seam can tempt impatience, but impatience is not useful around instruments. You warm, loosen, rinse, dry, and set back. The process takes time. The time is part of the cost of accuracy. No one passing the window sees it, but the record benefits from every minute. The hidden parts of the job are often the most repeated: drying the cylinder, clearing the rim, checking the level, rewriting a blurred note, sharpening a pencil, stacking paper away from damp, rinsing grit from the bottom of a can, inspecting the fence after children have leaned on it. These tasks do not make stories by themselves, yet together they make the station dependable. Dependability is built from actions small enough to be forgotten and repeated enough to become strong. In the 1910s, the city around you is changing, but slowly in the daily view. Electric lights appear in some places, older lamps remain in others. Trams run their routes, trains breathe steam near the station. Shops open and close behind familiar fronts. News comes and goes. Through it all, snowfall still requires a person to go outside and read what has happened. The modern world may carry reports faster, but it still needs your quiet footsteps. The railway especially cares about winter. Snow can slow trains, cover points, soften embankments during thaw, and change the work of men along the line. You may not be employed by the railway, yet your observations belong to the same web of winter knowledge. A reading from Innsbruck helps set the valley's condition among others. Somewhere, another worker clears a switch by lantern light, while you clear a gauge path by morning grey. Separate tasks share the same season. Road crews care too. So do those watching water. Snow in the valley may melt quickly, but snow held above the city can feed streams later, slowly or suddenly depending on warmth and rain. Your gauge is low compared with the high slopes, but it gives one fixed point in a larger pattern. Fixed points matter. Without them, memory slides around too easily, making every winter either the worst, the mildest, the deepest, or the strangest, depending on who is speaking. A ledger resists that kind of exaggeration. It does so gently, with rows. You can turn back and see what actually fell on a certain day. What melted, what remained, how often snow returned. The page does not argue. It only waits. This waiting quality suits the work. Weather records are not loud corrections. They are quiet invitations to look again. You, who made the entries, understand that better than anyone. The page holds a patient answer. Sometimes you are wrong at first glance, and the instrument corrects you. The snow seems deep, but the mark shows settling. The fall seems wet, but the water content is lower than expected. The wind seems harmless, but the drift near the fence suggests otherwise. These corrections do not embarrass you. They refine you. A good observer is not someone who never guesses wrongly, but someone who lets the gauge, the glass, and the ground teach the eye again and again. This teaching is slow. It happens over seasons, not minutes. The first winter may have felt like a list of instructions. By the next, you recognized more signs. After several winters, the snow surface itself began to speak more clearly. You could see a wind crust, smell a thaw, feel a dry cold through the boot, and predict how a sample might melt. The work entered the senses until procedure and perception became one steady practice. A visitor from a warmer region might ask how you endure such mornings. You might shrug, because endurance sounds too grand. You wear wool. You move carefully. You keep tools ready. You warm your hands when you can. You eat. You sleep. You do the next task. The cold is real, but it is also familiar, and familiar things become less sharp around the edges. We can feel that comfort in your lack of fuss, in your ordinary acceptance. There are pleasures too, not only discomforts. The first unmarked snow before dawn, the blue shadow under a fence, the warm smell of the workroom after the door closes, the clean line of water in the glass, the sound of a pencil on dry paper, the sight of the city waking under white roofs, the satisfaction of a report completed before the day scatters everyone's attention. These are modest pleasures, but they fit the hands well, and they last. A season of snow is also a season of small repairs. A latch loosens from repeated freezing. The boardwalk plank splits at one end. The paint on a marker wears where gloves brush it. You mend what you can, report what you must, and improvise only within good sense. A measuring station should not depend on cleverness alone. It depends on stable arrangements. Still, every station has little local solutions, known to the person who tends it through weather. You might wrap a bit of cloth around a handle that bites too coldly. You might place a stone where the path edge disappears under fresh snow. You might mark a safe stepping place on the fence with a notch only you really notice. These small adaptations do not appear in manuals, but they make the manual possible in real winter. Procedure needs a human place to live, and you provide that place with quiet, practical attention. On a late winter morning, the sun rises a little earlier, and the first reading no longer belongs entirely to darkness. The sky above the eastern roofs takes on a pale silver before you reach the gauge. Birds begin before the city does. Their calls are sparse, not spring-like yet, but present. Snow still lies deep in shaded places, and frost still rims the can. Yet the light has changed its mind slightly. You notice the change with a mixed feeling. Winter work becomes different when the end of winter is imaginable. You do not rush toward it. There will be more snow, perhaps heavy snow, perhaps wet storms that undo the thought of spring for a while. Still, the angle of light enters the yard differently. Drips start sooner on clear days. The surface crusts and softens in stronger daily cycles. Your notes begin to mention Thaw more often. The snowpack is still present, but it is becoming more restless. Restless snow requires just as much care as fresh snow. It settles, hollows, refreezes, and sometimes hides water beneath a crust. A boot may break through unexpectedly, filling with cold slush. The gauge plot may look smooth while changing quickly below the surface. You test cautiously where allowed, never disturbing the measuring point without reason. You learn to distrust appearances in the gentle way of someone who has been corrected by weather many times. The surface is only the beginning. When meltwater runs, it finds paths no one planned. Along the edge of the yard, under the boardwalk, beside the shed, across a stone threshold. You make sure it does not pool where it can freeze underfoot or affect the instrument. This may mean clearing a small channel away from the station, done with a tool edge and a patient hand. The water moves darkly through the snow, making a little whispering sound. Even melting has its own voice. The smell of thaw grows stronger as the days lengthen. Wet wood, old leaves, horse dung uncovered from ice, coal dust, stone, and the faint green scent of earth waiting below. After weeks of clean cold, these smells can seem almost loud. You notice them on the walk to the gauge, and they tell you as much about the season as the thermometer. The world is not only seen and measured, It is inhaled, step by step, into the memory. In the ledger, the snow depth lowers. Some mornings show no new fall, only settling and melt. The water content of new samples disappears when there is no new snow to collect, yet the snowpack remains in other observations. You may note patches bare in exposed places, snow remaining in shade, crust in morning, soft by afternoon. The station's winter record becomes a record of leaving, not just arriving. Departure can be measured too, if watched with care. People in the street respond to Thaw with a different mood. Coats open at the neck, steps are less hurried, shopkeepers clear not powder, but dirty ridges of slush. Children break crusts with their heels. Wheels splash. The snowbanks shrink from the walls, leaving damp stains at their old height. You observe this change without letting it carry you away from the gauge. The city may feel release, but the observer still has rows to fill. A late storm can return the old quiet suddenly. One evening the streets are wet and dark, and by morning they are white again. The new snow lies over thawed ground, sometimes melting from beneath, even as it gathers above. Such snow can be deceptive. It appears fresh and clean, but water works under it. You take the reading, note the condition, and collect the sample if required. The season is not a straight road. It wanders, and you follow with patience. Innsbruck's mountains hold winter longer than the streets. Even when the lower town softens, white remains in gullies and high shadows. You see it when the clouds lift, bright against dark rock and forest. Your lowland gauge cannot speak for all that snow, but it belongs to the same story. The valley's thaw and the mountain's reserve are connected by air, water, and time. You stand at the window and understand this connection, not abstractly, but through repeated mornings. The high snow will matter later, when warmth climbs. Streams will speak more loudly. The inn will carry cold meltwater. Fields and roads will feel the change. Your small station record from the city is one thread in that seasonal fabric. It does not need to contain the whole mountain. It only needs to be faithful to its place. A faithful small record can sit beside other faithful records, and together they begin to show the larger valley. As the season turns, fewer people ask about snow, even when some remains. Attention moves on before winter fully leaves. That is another reason few know your role. The public imagination follows the first fall, the deepest storm, the obvious inconvenience, and then the relief of thaw. It does not linger with the observer who continues noting crust, melt, patchiness, and final disappearance. Yet this ending is part of the work too, as deserving of notice as the first flake. The last snow in a gauge plot can look almost humble, a thin, uneven layer, dirty at the edges, sunken around the old measuring point. It may vanish in one afternoon, or cling in shaded corners after the open ground is bare. You record it without sentimentality, though you may feel something like tenderness for the season's remains. For months, snow shaped your day. Now it releases the yard slowly, and the dark ground returns with a smell of earth. When the gauge reads no snow, the work does not simply stop. Instruments must be cleaned, dried, inspected, and prepared for rain or for storage, depending on the station's arrangement. Winter notes must be checked and filed. Missing values must be explained if they can be. Smudged remarks may need recopying. The season becomes paper more fully now, moving from yard and can into ledger, bundle, shelf, and perhaps distant office. Snow leaves the ground and remains as record. You clean the can thoroughly on a mild day. Water runs clear over the metal, carrying away grit and soot. You dry the rim with a clean cloth, then hold it to the light, turning it slowly. Small scratches show where winter handled it. A dent, if found, must be noted or repaired. The instrument looks plain, almost empty, without snow in it, yet it has held months of sky. You set it down gently, as if it still carries something. The rule is checked too. Marks must remain clear. Wood can swell, wear, or warp, and a mark that cannot be read confidently is no mark at all. You run your finger along its edge, feeling rough places. The dark lines have faded slightly where gloves and snow rub them. If repainting or replacement is needed, it must happen before the next season asks for trust. A ruler is simple only when it is true. Simplicity depends on maintenance. The ledger pages are reviewed in better light. Winter's hurried notes, made with cold fingers or under lantern glow, now sit calmly before you. Some need no attention, others require a copied clarification from the pocket notebook. You compare, align, and correct without altering what happened. The goal is legibility, not improvement. A record must not be made prettier at the expense of honesty. You serve the past best by letting it remain itself, but clear. A page from a storm day may carry a water stain from a melted flake. You remember brushing at the notebook with your sleeve, perhaps in falling snow, perhaps with the lantern swinging. The stain is small and does not obscure the value. You leave it. It belongs to the page in a way, a physical trace of the conditions under which the number was taken. Official neatness has its place, but not every mark of weather needs to be erased. Bundles of reports may be tied with string. The string bites lightly into the paper edges, and you slide a scrap beneath it to prevent cutting. The bundle has weight now, not much, but enough to feel like a season when held in both hands. Each sheet is thin. Together, they resist bending. This is another quiet lesson of the job. Small records accumulate substance. Day by day, line by line, winter becomes something you can lift. Where the bundle goes depends on the office, the system, the year. It may remain in Innsbruck for a time, or be copied and sent onward, or feed into summaries prepared elsewhere. Once it leaves your table, you may not see it again. That is normal. The work passes out of the hand, yet before it goes you align the edges one last time, check the label, and make sure the station name and season can be read. Then the record begins its journey. You may never know who reads it later. A road planner, a water official, a meteorological clerk, a teacher, a historian, or no one for many years. The pages may sleep longer than the snow ever did. They may sit in a cupboard while offices change, while languages of administration shift, while the city grows, while new instruments arrive and old methods are replaced. Your handwriting may remain there quietly, waiting for some future eye to notice. This possibility does not make the original work grander, it makes it tenderer. You did not bend over the gauge for fame. You bent because the snow fell and the reading was due. You wrote because the page needed the value. You dried the instrument because tomorrow would come. If later someone wonders who took such care, the answer is not a name alone, but a set of repeated actions, done in cold air and lamplight, with steadiness. Spring advances in the valley, though snow still lingers above. The station yard changes color. Dark earth appears first near walls, then in broader patches. Old grass lies flattened and yellow, with new green just beginning underneath. Meltwater leaves faint channels where it ran. The boardwalk dries at the top, but stays damp below. When you walk out now, the sound underfoot is no longer a winter hush, but a soft mix of mud, grit, and remaining ice. The absence of snow has its own sound. More carts, sharper wheels, clearer voices, birdsong returning in small rehearsals. The city no longer seems padded. It rings a little. You may find the change almost too bright at first. After months of muffling, every noise has edges, yet the gauge plot remains familiar, even bare. You can still see where snow lay, where drifts formed, where the path ran, where your boots crossed day after day. Memory gives the ground a hidden whiteness. In warmer months, other precipitation may be measured, and the snow gauge man may become simply the observer again. Rain has its own habits, tapping, running, splashing, evaporating, collecting with fewer visible layers than snow. You may tend rain gauges, read temperatures, note clouds, and keep the same disciplined hours. But the snow season leaves a particular imprint on the body. Rain can wet you quickly, but snow asks for a longer relationship, a slower companionship. Still, our attention stays with the snow work, because that is where the forgotten figure becomes clearest. The role is obscure precisely because it is practical, seasonal, and absorbed into larger institutions. It is not a title carved above a doorway. It may not appear in city directories as anyone imagines it. It may be only one duty among others, carried out by a man whose formal designation sounded more ordinary. Yet in winter, the gauge makes him into the snowman of records. You might have been called an observer, assistant, station worker, clerk, or caretaker. The phrase snow gauge man is our gentle way of staying close to the act itself. It names the posture more than the payroll. It keeps us beside the fence in the blue morning, where your hands hold the rule and your eyes find the mark. Titles can blur. Actions remain vivid. We follow the action because it is where the sleeping mind can rest most easily. The workplace changes with the season's end. Without snow samples melting on trays, the room feels drier, the coat hangs lighter, gloves are mended and put away, though not too far away in a mountain city where cold can return unexpectedly. The ledger for winter is stored, and the current pages shift toward rain, temperature, cloud and wind. Yet the memory of snow remains in the arrangement of things, like a scent that stays after a candle is out. A late spring cold snap may dust the roofs again, not enough for the full weight of winter, perhaps, but enough to call back the routine. You wake to a paler window, step outside, and find a thin cover on the gauge plot. Such snow is delicate and brief. It may vanish by midday, but it still deserves its reading if it meets the station's rules. You bend as before, perhaps with lighter gloves, and the old winter posture returns to your body. Thin snow can be harder to measure than deep snow. A small unevenness in the ground matters more. A breath, a step, a touch can disturb it. You read gently, knowing that by afternoon there may be no trace at all. The sample, if collected, seems almost nothing in the can, and the water in the glass may be a narrow line. Yet nothing is still something when properly recorded. The last small fall takes its place beside the deep ones, equal in dignity. By afternoon, the thin snow is gone from sunlit places. Only shaded corners hold a little white, shrinking at the edges. The city resumes its spring sounds quickly, as if winter's small return had been a passing thought. You enter the note, clean the instrument, and set the page aside to dry. There is no need for ceremony. The weather came, you observed it, and it left. This plain sequence is the deepest rhythm of the station. As months pass, you may walk the gauge plot in dry weather to check exposure. Grass grows, weeds appear near the fence, and the ground may need trimming, so winter readings will not be affected by hidden unevenness. A snow station is prepared long before snow. You cut or clear what must be cleared, mend posts, check distances, and keep the area known. In summer light, this may look unrelated to snow, but you know the next white season begins with such ordinary tasks. The summer yard smells of dust, sun-warmed wood, and green stems bruised by the blade. Bees may move near the fence, and the air from the river feels different, carrying moisture without cold. You stand where snow once reached your boots, and imagine the future surface lying level again. This imagination is practical, not dreamy. You must know how winter will sit on the ground before it arrives. Preparation is a kind of memory turned forward. In the office, winter data may be summarized. Totals, averages, notable falls, longest cover, thaw periods. These summaries have their place, and you prepare or assist with them as required. Yet the summary smooths the season. It cannot hold every dawn, every change of glove, every lantern-shadowed reading. That is why we keep returning to the daily work. The truth of the snow gauge man is not only in totals, but in the repeated nearness of hand to mark. A total snowfall figure can impress the mind for a moment. A daily routine calms it for longer. The total says how much. The routine shows how a person lived beside that much, how the season entered mornings and tools and paper. For sleep, we remain with the routine, because routine lowers the heart. It lets the mind follow one action into the next without needing a sharp turn. You open the gate, step onto the boardwalk, bend, read, write, and return. Even in summer, you may open an old winter page and feel the cold come back. The date, the value, and a remark are enough. Heavy wet snow in morning, strong settling by afternoon, light drift near fence. These words restore the room's old smell of damp wool and coal heat. They restore the faint sting in the fingertips. They restore the careful way you carried the can. A record can be a doorway, but only if someone pauses long enough to enter. Most people do not pause. They have no reason to. That is why few know the 1910s Innsbruck Snow Gauge Man. The work supported other decisions, then slipped beneath them. The pages may have been archived under institutional names, not under yours. The readings may have appeared in tables where the observer's body was invisible, but invisibility is not absence. We have been walking with that body, hearing its boots, feeling its cold, and watching its care. Autumn comes with sharper mornings. The grass in the gauge plot loses its summer softness. Frost appears first as a silvering near the ground, then as a white film on boards and fence rails. You notice frost because it teaches the eye to expect snow again. The air smells of leaves, smoke, and cold stone. The instruments are checked with renewed attention. Winter is still some distance away, but the station begins to gather itself, quietly and early. You repaint a mark if it needs repainting. The brush is small, and the paint smells strong in the cool air. Your hand must be steady, because a mark made carelessly will trouble every reading later. You let the paint dry, shielded from dust and touch. Then you stand back and see the post ready for snow that has not yet fallen. There is something restful in preparing for a known return. The world changes, but winter has a dependable path. The collecting can is inspected again. Its rim is round, its surface clean, its place assigned. You make sure drainage around the station will not flood and freeze badly. You check the boardwalk for rot or looseness. You clear leaves that could lie beneath snow and affect the ground surface. Each task is minor. Together they make the future work possible. A winter reading taken in January begins with a leaf removed in October. Time folds like paper. The first frost, thick enough to crunch underfoot, arrives before the first snow. You walk to the plot and hear the grass break softly beneath your boots. The fence is pale. The air is bright and still. Your breath shows again after months when it did not. The body remembers the feeling immediately. Shoulders draw in. Hands seek pockets. Eyes look toward the sky with a more wintering attention. The snow gauge man returns gradually before snow itself returns. When the first snow finally comes, it may be only a dusting. It catches on roofs, carts, railings, and the colder parts of the ground. Stones still show through. The city does not yet surrender to winter, but it acknowledges it. You go out with the old tools, and the first reading of the new season has a particular freshness. The rule touches shallow white. The notebook receives a new line. The cycle begins again, not with spectacle, but with recognition. The first sample is small. Indoors, it melts almost immediately, leaving a modest line in the glass. You record it without disappointment. Early snow often comes and goes. Its value lies not in depth alone, but in marking the season's turn. The paper now has its first winter entry, and after it, more will follow at their own pace. Some days blank, some days full, some days wet, some days dry. The ledger opens its long patience once more to the sky. As winter establishes itself again, your routine tightens. Gloves stay nearer the door, the lantern is checked more often. The path to the gauge becomes habitual before it is deeply worn. You begin to read clouds with the old winter attention, noticing not only whether they are dark, but how low they sit, how they move against the mountains, how the air feels beneath them. The city's familiar sounds start to soften under frost. Everything prepares, and you prepare with it. There is a kind of companionship between you and the gauge across seasons. It is not sentimental, but it is real. You know how it looks in first snow, deep snow, thaw, rain, bare ground, frost, and summer dust. You have seen it under lantern, sun, fog, and moon. You have mended its surroundings and trusted its marks. It has required your care, and in return, it has given your days a calm structure. Together, you and the instrument make memory. On a clear, cold night, before a larger storm, you might stand by the plot and feel the stillness that often comes ahead of change. The sky is low with cloud, but not yet falling. The town sounds close, as if held under a lid. Your breath rises and hangs. The gauge can is empty, open, waiting. The boardwalk is clean. The notebook is ready in your pocket. Nothing is happening yet, and yet the whole station feels awake with expectation. Then, sometime in the dark, snow begins. Not loudly, not with announcement. It arrives as a soft alteration of sound, a lessening of edges, a faint whitening on the sill when you look out. The morning will ask you to go again. You will dress in the same careful order, lift the same tools, step into the same yard made new by weather. We know the path now. It has been walked enough times to become almost a lullaby of motion. The next dawn finds the gauge with a fresh cover, and the city quiet beneath another beginning. You bend close, read the first depth of the new fall, and write it with the steadiness of someone who has learned to trust small acts repeated over years. The snow is light, the wind calm, the can clean. Your note is brief, the world around you is not brief, but the note holds what it can. You carry the sample inside, and the room receives another piece of winter. As it melts, the stove warms, the paper waits, and the light slowly changes at the window. This scene has happened before, and that is why it comforts. Repetition lets the listener rest, because nothing leaps out, nothing demands sudden attention, nothing breaks the line of the day. We simply follow you from snow to water, from water to mark, from mark to ledger, and from ledger back to the waiting sky. The work turns and returns, smooth as a well-used handle. A faint pink enters the clouds above the roofs. It does not last long. The morning becomes grey again, but for a few minutes the snow outside holds that colour, as if lit from within. You notice it while reading the waterline in the cylinder. The beauty does not distract you. It accompanies the reading. The glass, the pale water, the pink snow beyond the window, the scratch of the pen, all belong to one calm moment of attention. The day's report is copied and set aside. You wipe the table where a ring of meltwater escaped the tray. The cloth leaves a darker circle that fades as the wood dries. You check your sleeve for graphite, rub it away, and sharpen the pencil again. Each small act has a beginning and an end, and the mind can rest in those clear edges. When the tools are ready, you look toward the window, where the next flakes have begun to fall more thickly. By mid-morning, the storm has settled in. The houses across the street soften until their far edges blur. Roof lines disappear into falling white. The sounds of wheels and voices move farther away, not because they are distant, but because snow has placed a hush between them and you. The gauge plot lies beyond the glass, gathering the next measure. You wait for the proper time, resisting the urge to look too often, because waiting faithfully is part of the discipline. When the hour comes, you step out into a world reduced to near things: fence post, board, boot, glove, breath, gauge. The rest of Innsbruck is there, but hidden. The snow lands on your eyelashes and the bridge of your nose. It gathers on the notebook edge despite your sheltering hand. You move slowly, almost ceremonially. though nothing here is ceremony in the formal sense. It is care repeated until it looks like ritual, and ritual softened into routine. The measurement is taken, the sample secured, the note made. You return indoors with snow on your shoulders and the faint ache of cold in your fingers. The door closes. The room exhales warmth around you. The can is placed on the tray. The notebook opens. Outside, the storm continues without impatience. Inside, you begin the same transformation once more, letting snow become water, water become reading, reading become line, and line become part of the long, quiet season. As the meltwater settles, you hear footsteps in the hall and the murmur of voices beyond the door. Other people are working too, in offices, shops, stables, kitchens, rail yards, and streets. The snow touches all of them differently. For you, it arrives as a measure. For a baker, as a delay in flour delivery. For a driver, as weight on wheels. For a child, as play. For the city, as both beauty and labor. Your gauge gathers one answer. The answer is never complete, and that is all right. No single instrument can contain a whole snowfall. It can only speak faithfully from its place. Your job is to keep that place honest. Open enough, level enough, undisturbed enough, read carefully enough. These modest words, enough and careful, are the true vocabulary of the station. Perfection is not the daily companion here. Faithfulness is. You work within limits, and by respecting them, you make the record stronger. The storm may continue into afternoon, and your day stretches accordingly. Meals become smaller, taken between readings. The bread is eaten standing, the tea forgotten until lukewarm, the gloves dried only partly before they are needed again. Still, the rhythm remains unhurried. Snow sets the schedule, but it does not make you frantic. You move from door to gauge, gauge to table, table to glass, glass to ledger, each passage familiar, each return a little more tired. Tiredness changes attention, so you compensate with routine. You read twice. You place tools in the same positions. You make notes immediately. You check the page before closing the book. The body may want shortcuts, especially in cold and repetition, but the routine protects you from them. It is like a railing on a stair, always there beneath the hand. By leaning on order, you keep the work calm even as the snow keeps falling. The afternoon light dims early under the storm. The lamp is lit before its usual hour, and the flame's reflection floats in the window over the falling snow outside. For a while, you see both worlds at once, the warm room and the cold yard, the ledger and the gauge, the hand and the flakes. The reflection makes it seem as though the lamp is burning out in the snow, a small amber point held inside the storm's white. You do not stare long, because the next entry waits, but the image remains with you, and now with us. The snow gauge man's life is made of such overlapping views, indoors and outdoors, official and bodily, exact and atmospheric, known and forgotten. You move between them without naming the movement. You simply do the work, and the work carries you across those boundaries as quietly as a bridge carries footsteps over a stream. Evening comes with the storm still present, though lighter than before. The city has withdrawn into itself. Fewer carts pass. Voices are brief. Lamps glow in softened circles. The gauge plot has risen again under the day's accumulation, and the path must be opened just enough for one more reading. You take the shovel, feeling its handle polished by old use, and step out into snow that has lost the day's detail and become one continuous surface. Shoveling by lamplight is slow. You place the snow carefully away from the plot, building a low bank where it will not drift back easily. The shovel bites, lifts, turns, releases. Your breath grows louder under the scarf. Snow squeaks beneath your boots where it is colder, then thuds where the shovel sets down a wet lower layer. The work warms your back and shoulders. You stop before sweat can chill you, leaning on the handle while the lantern glows beside your feet. The final reading of the evening is made with more effort, but no more fuss. You bend close, clear your breath from the sight line, and read the mark. You note continued snow, less intense, light wind, path cleared, gauge clear. The words carry the day's fatigue inside them, though no one else may hear it. Then you reset what must be reset and stand upright slowly, feeling the pull in the legs. The snow falls gently around your silence. Back inside, the last sample begins to melt. You watch it for a while because the mind is tired enough to find comfort in simple change. White becomes translucent. Translucent becomes water. The mound lowers. The line rises. Nothing hurries. The process is visible, understandable, and kind to a weary observer. You read when it is ready, not before, and enter the value with careful letters. The day's storm now exists in several lines, spread through the ledger. You review them once. Morning, midday, afternoon, evening. Snow type changing slightly, wind light, accumulation steady. The page holds the day in a way the memory alone could not. Without the entries, the storm might become only one white blur in the mind. With them, it has shape. You close the ledger after the ink dries, and the sound of the cover settling feels like a soft weight placed over a completed portion of time. Yet the storm has not ended, and so nothing is truly complete. The gauge receives the night as the room darkens. You prepare the tools for morning again, because the next reading may be deeper. The shovel is placed near the door, the lantern is cleaned, the rule is wiped dry, the notebook is checked for blank pages. Your hands move more slowly now, but they still know the path from object to object. Habit carries what wakefulness begins to release. Outside, snow continues in the lamplit street, while inside the workroom the stove settles. The damp gloves steam faintly, and the waiting instruments keep their places for the next cold walk into the morning. For now, the instruments can rest where you have placed them, clean and ready, while the room grows softer around the edges. The ledger lies closed on the table, its cover holding the day's snow inside without a sound. Your gloves hang open near the stove, giving back their dampness in a faint woolen steam, and the metal can sit dry beside the glass cylinder. Outside, Innsbruck is quiet under the dark, and the snow gauge man's last task is simply to notice that nothing else needs doing with haste. You lower the lamp until the flame becomes small and steady. The table slips into amber shadow, and the ruler's marks fade from sight, one by one. Your hands, warmed now, no longer hold the pencil, the can, or the cold edge of the notebook. They rest at your sides, carrying only the memory of careful work. Beyond the window, snow still lies on roofs and rails, on fence posts and silent paths, but it no longer asks anything from you tonight. It only settles, softly, into stillness. The stove gives a final low tick as the room releases the heat of the day. Your coat is dry enough for morning, your boots stand where they should, and the page has accepted all it needed to hold. No one outside may think of the gauge in the dark yard, or of the quiet worker who kept its numbers true, and that is all right. The work has been done in its own small circle of light, faithfully and without noise, like a lantern kept low in snow. So the room is left in order, the door is closed gently, and the night takes back the station piece by piece. The gauge waits beneath the winter sky, the ledger sleeps on the table, and your footsteps fade from the floorboards into the hush of Innsbruck. The lamp is dimmed, the tools are still, and there is nothing left for you to measure now but rest.